call this meeting of the Water Planning Committee to order Tuesday, May 19th, 2015 at 6:31 p.m. Now we take roll call.
Chairman Columbia.
Here.
Vice Chair Batter.
Here.
Committee Member Nark.
Here.
Committee Member Hinman.
Here.
Committee Member Cashin.
Here.
Committee Member Scheid.
Here.
Committee Member Sharp. Here. Committee Member Wilson.
Here.
Committee Member Sednick.
Here.
Alternate Pencrozy.
Here.
Alternate Sednick.
Here.
First item on the agenda is to approve the draft minutes from the regular Water Planning Committee held on May 12th, 2015. Can I have a motion and a second to approve the draft minutes?
So moved.
Was that Jerry?
So moved, yes.
I have a motion from committee member Wilson.
Second.
And I have a second from committee member Scheid. Item is open for committee discussion. Any comments?
Mr. Chairman. I have a correction that I'd like to make on page 6.
Let me get to the page. 1 second, please. Okay, we're there.
Okay. Committee member Sharp said that a balancing act is needed between the dire needs and a reduction in the first couple of years. Committee member Sharp said she'd like to see what the most urgent needs are and how we can draw the rates down. I think I specifically asked that the engineering company prioritize those needs as both cost and need.
Could you please state exactly how you like it worded? Well, what would you like?
Well, let's put it this way, dire needs. What's the most urgent need?
Can you state exactly how you want it worded?
Okay, committee member Sharp said she'd like to have the engineering company prioritize the most urgent needs and how we can draw down the rates.
Is there anybody else? Motion to approve the amended minutes. Can I have a motion? And a second? Excuse me.
Motion.
I have a motion from committee member Badner. And a second? Second from committee member Scheid. Can we go? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay. Motion carries. Now it's time for citizens who would like to address the Water Planning Committee. Are there any speaker cards?
None.
Does anyone in the audience wish to speak? We have no old business on the agenda for this meeting. So moving on to new business, I'll turn this over to our facilitator, Teresa Manikin.
Thank you very much, Chairman. All right, you had a lot of homework to do since we met last week, and Anna's been kind enough to kind of synthesize that on several fronts, getting many things to you. So I hope you took the time to do that. I'm going to go through real quickly the calendar one more time. We'd like to do that every meeting just so we remember where we're at and where we're going. We're now, of course, in the discussion of the rate recommendations, moving toward the council work session, which is scheduled for June. The date's on the next page, June 15th, I believe, so that there can be a community meeting, the 60-day notice period, council adoption, and then the rates become effective next year. So those dates are as follows. In case you forgot, June 15th is the council work session. June 17th is the community meeting. Of course, we'd like you all to be at these things. Then July 10th would be the 60-day notice posted. Council would adopt the 30-day notice of intent in August. They'd adopt the rates September 28th, and the rates would become effective January 1st. I know you've seen that calendar again. We're just kind of reminding ourselves of the milestones. All right. So tonight's meeting, you have the agenda in front of you. You have several things that we're going to go over later. Some are some tools that Anna thought and we all thought would be useful when we start talking about the recommendations and really refining that. So I'm hoping that'll work for us. We have the utility rate study consultant is going to finish the presentation and talking about the alternatives. There were several things that came up at last meeting, remember, were to look at some different alternatives and what would that look like in terms of real cost. So he's going to provide that to you. Agenda item 6.2, which is the non-rate revenues and charges, which was the one item we didn't get to last time. If it's okay with the committee, what we'd like to do is move that later in the agenda so that we can get to talking about the rates, the utility rates, and then add that on the end, because those are kind of additional things, but not necessarily every single ratepayers sees that. Then we'll have discussion, and we have some boards in the back to help us do that as well, and hopefully come up with some recommendations tonight. Does that sound okay? And we're going to probably do the same thing where we do a little round table just to make sure everybody's heard. All right, I'm going to go ahead and pass it to Bob to talk about the outcomes.
This screen we've talked about before, and just the purpose of the committee is one of the main purposes is to give your feedback on the rates. As we talked tonight, I wanted a couple things to bring to your attention. We have really been very transparent through this whole process, both in terms of presenting information. We haven't held anything back. We've given you all the information that we have at our disposal. And also, this has been, you may feel it's been a pretty fast track that you've been on with the amount of information that has been shared with this committee and the pace in which now we're moving to hopefully bring to conclusion and with a recommendation. But we too have been challenged. We have had we've got a lot of players in here. We've got a consultant providing technical information, giving us cost estimates. We have a kind of economist.com that we're feeding them the information. Once we get the numbers as far as the improvements, they're reviewing those numbers, and then they're coming back to staff, and we're trying to check these numbers, validate to make sure we've got the numbers correct. Well, in the last 2 weeks, really, we've looked at them, and through this process, we've found that there's been some reconciliation errors that Larry will talk about a little later, and also there's some things that we feel may have been double counted. So we have not given you a finished product, and that's, I think, in the spirit of this committee. We're not giving you the rate recommendation. We're presenting a rate recommendation for your consideration. And as you'll see tonight, based on how the consensus of the committee evolves, then that will drive some of the numbers. So these numbers will change slightly even after tonight's information. So this is it's kind of moving to a point where at the end of tonight, we believe that what you'll see reflects what the rate will be very, very closely. But we'll have to go through and really recheck and refine to ensure that what you're voting on is what the rate will be. So as we work through this agenda tonight, the committee, and with Larry's information that he'll provide, will come to a point where you'll either be comfortable or you'll need further information. We hope that we can bring it to a conclusion so we can answer those questions tonight. That's our goal, is to provide the information you need in order to make your decision. Or if there's any loose ends, then we may have to tighten those loose ends, get back to you either by another meeting or via email, and we can talk more as the evening progresses. I just want to touch on the original objectives again, because this process has evolved. This is what the objectives were, to try to hit all of these items in the course of this discussion. Review and make recommendations on the master plans. I think we've done that. There's been considerable information that you've heard that would affect the rates. Review future water needs and to support growth and development, and also make recommendations for water resources for growth and development. Those that we have, and as we've discussed, some of those projections, the required capacity improvements and increases, that is not part of the recommendation. The recommendation that you see before you is to complete the necessary repairs, reinforcements, and redundancies necessary to operate our system in a safe and sustainable fashion, ensuring public health concerns are met and a consistent, adequate supply of water to our current customers. This is a 5-year plan, and it is envisioned as part of this longer range plan that in the next 5 to 10 years, based on our water demand needs going forward, we will have to make some additional investments to address growth or capacity. The fourth item is the utility rate structure. I think we've spent quite a bit of time on that, and I think those are issues that if you still have any questions there, we can try to resolve those also. And that will come up in the rate process that we'll talk about tonight. And then finally, the last, review support utility rates to support operations and maintenance. That is an area that we have really hit very hard, as I mentioned earlier. And then the draft recommendation of the water needs analysis, the utility structure and rates to be forwarded to council, and then any other actions consistent with the provisions of these bylaws. I heard a lot last week regarding conservation, additional measures that could be taken to ensure that our customers are conserving water going forward. Those are relevant issues, but they may not drive the rate. So we want to be clear as far as a rate recommendation and any other items that you feel important for us to consider as we work through the remainder of the Integrated Water Master Plan, as far as future conservation initiatives, future new policy changes. It's the appropriate time to bring those up, and so that we have that as we work through those issues over the course of this completion of this Integrated Water Master Plan. So just with that preview, I wanted to go over those points to prepare you a little bit for the numbers that you'll see tonight and what we envision going through, as Teresa mentioned, those elements of that give us opportunity for to hear your recommendations, consensus, and how that may or may not affect the rates, and what do those adjustments look like. We hope to have that information, so you have that as you leave here tonight. So with that, I will pass it over to Dan Jackson.
Thank you very much. Once again, I appreciate the chance to come before you tonight and talk a little bit more about your long-term rate plan as it is presented both last week and tonight. The rate presentation that we went through last week, really should be considered to be the most conservative, or what you would call the worst case scenario. It was the scenario where you assume that all major projects were funded virtually immediately, and that all needs were funded fully, completely, and within a 1 to 2 year period. That is an ideal scenario in terms of operating utility, but it is not always a practical scenario, because any utility, like any business or like any household, has to balance what it wants to spend with what its customers are willing to pay. So, for that reason, after you had a chance to take a look at the impact of funding everything up front, that gave you and it gave staff the chance to take a look at the numbers in more detail and maybe look and see where some of the numbers could be revised a little bit, maybe phase in some expenses over a number of years that would be able to moderate the rate adjustments that you would be looking at recommending. So that was what we did over the past week. And tonight, what I'm going to do is present to you the results of that revised analysis. I'm going to start out just by talking about the current rate plan again, just to kind of refresh your memory about where we were last week. I know you all saw an awful lot of numbers, but I'll summarize some of the most important ones. Then we'll talk briefly about the second alternative, which assumes that you phase in certain expenses over the next few years instead of funding it immediately. Then, if we have time, we'll go through the non-rate revenues and fees, and then we'll summarize the presentation. So let's talk about the current rate plan. What did we talk about last week? If you recall, one of the key points we made in the presentation last week was that the water and wastewater utilities cost of service and rate plan is going to reflect ultimately the decisions you make regarding both the extent of the funding for the utility operation and the timing of the funding. You have, the funding falls into basically 5 categories. The first category is your existing budget, your typical budget expenses, what a water and wastewater utility would typically incur on an annual basis. Personnel, basic operations, chemicals, electricity, that kind of thing. The second category is your cap water costs. How quickly do you want to start funding the cap water costs? The third is your budget supplementals, or the additional expenditures that staff has identified as needed in order to operate the utility in a most propitious manner. The fourth would be your unfunded capital improvements. I know we spent an awful lot of time talking about the long-term capital improvement plan, both what is needed to be expended and what impact that would have on your long-term rate plan. And then finally, the unfunded impact fee reimbursements and the line oversizing expenses. Those are the 5 key categories we went over last week. And as you'll see tonight, we have refined a few of these categories to try to ease the impact on the ratepayers. If you funded all of those expenses up front, what would be the impact on your average ratepayer? Well, I showed you several charts that showed what the actual rates are, but what most people are really interested in when you look at a rate plan is, what's the bottom line? How will it impact a typical residential ratepayer? Well, here in the city of Goodyear, the typical residential ratepayer uses about 7,000 gallons of water service a month, and their winter average for wastewater is about 5,000 gallons. Now, an average is just that. It means that some people use more and some people use less. But 7,000 gallons is a very good tracking point for you to understand the implications of the rate plan as it was proposed last week. If you look at this chart right here, you can see that the typical residential family that uses 7,000 gallons of water and 5,000 gallons of wastewater pays about $74.24 a month for that service. Now, that's before taxes and garbage and other things that typically are on our bill. It's just for your basic water and wastewater service. What would be the impact of the rate plan and the immediate funding of all those categories of expenses? Well, as you can see, the impact would be fairly significant in the first year. Effective in January 2016, your average residential bill would go from $74 to $93, which would be an increase of about $18.78, which is about a 25% increase in an average bill. In the second year, the bill would go up by about another $8.68 to $101.70. But in the years after that, the increases were much more modest. A 5% increase or a $5 a month increase in 2018, followed by $2 to $3 a month in 2019 and 2020, which averages out to about 2 to 3%. Now, this rate plan is, as I termed last week, what you call the dental chair approach. It is get it all done now, get everything funded right away, and make sure the utility is operating in the most efficient manner as immediately as possible. Well, what that requires is it requires upfront and fairly significant rate adjustments in 2016 and 2017. One of the initial reactions we got last week was, what would happen if, could we spread this out a little bit more? Do we have to do it all at once? Maybe ratepayers wouldn't want a 25% increase right off the bat, but maybe they'd be willing to settle for a lesser rate of increase and have it phased in over a couple of more years in exchange for still getting the level of service that they want. And that is what we looked at over the last couple of days. So let's take a look at the second alternative rate plan. Under the second alternative, we went back to each of the numbers and we made the following new assumptions. The first thing we assumed was that the budget supplemental categories are phased in over 5 years instead of basically being phased in immediately. So instead of going over $1 million in budget supplementals right away, you just sort of stage it in over the period 2016 to 2020. Same thing would be true with the impact fee credits and the line oversizing. Don't do it all at once. Don't build Rome in a day. In other words, phase it in over a number of years. Same thing's true with the cap water allocations. We also assume that instead of doing it all immediate funding in 2016 and 2017, you phase that in over 5 years as well. We're also going to show you the impact if you decide to make a change in the way your commercial and multifamily rates are charged. We talked last week about the fact that your commercial and multifamily rates are also charged an inclining or an inverted block unit rate for volume service. What would be the impact if you decided to adopt a uniform rate for commercial and multifamily customers? We'll show you that too. And then finally, did we take out the debt service charge? We have a sample debt service charge also that we would go over. Now, one of the very important things about this alternative 2 is that it assumes at this point that we don't make any changes to the CIP, that the CIP is still fully funded under alternative 2's rate plan. And that's an important assumption to make because it still is a significant factor in your long-term rate plan. So you phase in the supplementals and the CIP and the oversizing and the cap water, but you keep the CIP where it was originally projected to be. So what impact would that have on your wastewater and water cost of service? Well, this is your alternative 2 cost of service, assuming each of these assumptions are adopted. As you can see, your existing budget expenses still increase for the wastewater utility from $12.7 million in 2015 up to $16.6 million by 2020. You're still seeing a gradual increase in operating costs. Cost of everything goes up by 3 to 4% a year, and also you would be adding some additional personnel as the system continues to grow. So your operating costs would continue to go up. Your budget supplementals, however, instead of immediately being $1.2 million, start out at $689,000 and slowly work their way up to $1.298 million by 2020. Same thing with the unfunded CIP still stays at $433,000 because you're still issuing that debt for the long-term capital improvement plan, but your unfunded impact fees also are phased in over 5 years instead of going to $1 million right away. So what that means is that your cost of service in 2015 is $12.7 million. It still reaches $19 million by 2020, but the increase is much more gradual. Same thing is true on the water side. This is the water cost of service. Your budgeted expenses are, once again, are forecast to go up 3 to 5% a year, and with additional personnel going up a little bit more as your system expands and you add more personnel. Your cap water allocations, instead of being over $2 million immediately, start out at $1 million and gradually work their way up to $2.7 million by 2020. Budget supplementals, instead of being $1.2 million immediately, also gradually work their way up. The unfunded CIP debt service does not change. That's still the same from last week. But the unfunded impact fees and the line oversizing is also implemented on a much more gradual schedule than what we assumed last week. Bottom line is that your cost of service of $12.4 million still reaches almost $24 million by 2020, but also goes up much more gradually. This chart right here compares your water and wastewater combined cost of service under Alternative 1, which was what you saw last week, as compared to Alternative 2. A couple of things to notice about this chart. First thing, under both alternatives, costs continue to go up. There's really no avoiding that. However, under Alternative 2, as you can see, the increase is much more gradual. Under Alternative 1, costs tended to jump in 2016 and 2017 and then smoothed out a little bit in 2018 through 2020, whereas under Alternative 2, the line is much more consistent. In other words, the increase is much more constant as opposed to being front-loaded. What this chart also tells you is that by 2020, the cost of service is still about where we projected it to be last week. So, what does this mean in terms of your long-term rate plan? Well, I could show you a lot of rate numbers, but let's just cut to the chase once again. What this means is that your average residential ratepayer who uses 7,000 gallons of water and 5,000 gallons of wastewater, whose average bill is $71.65 a month for basic water and wastewater service before taxes and garbage and all that other stuff, would see their bill go up to $81.99, which is an increase of $10.34 or a 14% increase. So instead of a 25% increase, like what you saw in last week, the increase would be far less. It would be $10 a month instead of $19 a month. Let me just double check that. I hate to quote numbers and find out that I'm wrong. Yes, the original alternative one showed the rate going from $71 to $93. Under this scenario, it goes to $81. In the second year, 2017, their bill would go to $89, which would be a $7.88 increase. Whereas under alternative one, by 2017, the bill would be $101. So now you're talking about $12 less. In January of 2018, the bill would go up by another $7 a month to $97 a month, as opposed to $106 as what it was in alternative one. But in January 2019 and January 2020, the rate adjustments are a little bit higher. What this plan does is it basically smooths out the rate increases to a much greater extent. Instead of front-loading the increases and having just nominal increases in 2019 and 2020, you're seeing much more consistent rate adjustments. Now, I've been doing water and wastewater rate consulting for 30 years, and I've learned a few things in the 200-plus rate presentations I've done to cities around the country. And one thing is that ratepayers tend to greatly prefer consistent, gradual adjustments as opposed to big, sudden increases. They just prefer that because a more gradual rate plan allows them more time to adjust their family budgets. It allows them more time to get used to the higher rate structure, and it allows them more time to adjust their own usage habits to meet the higher costs that they are forced to pay. So that's not true in every community. There are some communities where the preference is to just basically implement it all at once and get it over with. That is what we look to you for feedback on with regards to what you think would be more fair, just, and reasonable to the community. So that's the first break point for questions, I guess.
Do we want to take a break for questions now? Yes.
Dan had a lot of slides he gave us with all that information like last time. They start in the appendix on page 29, so if you want to see the details, like slides 41 and 46 have the water and wastewater charges broken out, so you can see like the cap fees and things like that. So I just want to
Yeah.
And the supplementals that you had as well, Anna, is on that secondary page, right? Didn't you provide that in the secondary page?
and then the handouts.
Yes. Okay. Okay, so did we have questions for now? Or any questions or for Dan?
Go round table if we could.
Yeah, sure. Committee Member Wilson. I hate to catch you off guard.
I noticed one thing here. On alternate one, it shows the current is 74.24, and we go off of that. On alternate two, it shows the current is 71.65.
Yeah, there appears to be it looks like the water charge is undercounted a little bit. Sorry about that. That's just a small number change. So what that does is that means the rate adjustment would be I'm sorry about this. It would be about $7.80 in the first year instead of $10.34.
Or would the total go up about $3 a year?
I'm sorry?
Well,
No, it wouldn't affect any of the other years.
Okay, I mean, but it would go from 71 to 81, or from 74 to 84.
The base is 74.24. This number didn't. The current rate. I already know what the issue was.
Okay.
There was just a small boot in the rate calculator. I apologize for that.
Okay.
If I could, just to make sure we're clear in answering your question, So that number would be the $74 in the first column, but the second column does not change. And I think that's the question you were
Yes,
asking.
that's correct.
So the increase changes,
Would be
it becomes
actually lower.
7 something instead of that, and
Instead
the
of 10.
percentage goes down,
Okay,
but, and very good catch.
Yeah.
okay. All right, second thought, does that slow down any of the implementation of any of the, would that slow down any of the projects?
No, it's just a number boot on the chart.
Okay,
Did you mean under the alternative? Is it going to slow down the?
yeah.
Okay.
I wanted to make sure that we weren't going to postpone something that should be done.
Well, one thing to keep in mind about anything like this, when you phase in rate adjustments over a longer period of time, you're going to have less revenue in the first couple of years. So what it means is you're not going to be able to do all the impact fee or all the line oversizing that you originally intended to do. You're going to have to phase that in over a couple of years.
Okay.
You're not going to be able to do all the cap water allocation purchases in 2016 that you originally thought you were going to do. You have to phase that in over a few years too. One of the consequences of phasing in rates over a longer period of time is that it just means you get a little less revenue, and you got to work with that.
But the CIP has not been affected. The CIP
Right. The
improvements
one thing
are the same
this plan does, this plan still fully funds the capital improvement plan.
in the schedule that was originally envisioned.
What kind of impact would not having that cap water have on us?
I think he's asking, does that put anything at risk? If you're slowing down your CIP implementation, does that put anything at
The
risk?
specific question,
right?
what impact,
Yeah, does
if you
that
did
mean
0 on the
long range we
CAP?
don't get as much cap water, period?
Oh, yes, under this assumption, you would not be pumping it as much into the ground as under the original assumption that you saw. But you still would be doing just over $1 million.
Okay.
Other questions?
Yeah.
Any questions for, none for you? Committee Member Passion?
Not right now.
Oh, yeah? Committee Member Scheid? Committee Member Zednik?
Just a couple quick questions. The plan that you'd outlined was a plan that was to bring us up to where we should have been 5 years ago. Is that correct? I mean, this plan should have been implemented 5 years ago, and we should be at a new plan stage at this point. Is that correct?
By plan, are you talking about the capital improvement plan?
No, I'm talking about this rate plan here that you outlined. Initially, this was, we're like 5 years behind. If we had done this 5 years ago, we would be looking at a new plan. Is that correct?
I wouldn't agree with that. We did do a rate increase about 5 years ago.
I realize that, but my question is, this was a plan that we should have followed 5 years ago. Is that correct or not?
That was not, if you're talking about the specific improvements,
Not specifically, but in general.
no, I'm talking like the capital improvement plan and that type of thing. Those were not proposed or discussed at that point in time.
So we
Can
never
you
planned
argue
on
some
that.
of those old wells should have been considered at that point? We can make that argument. That was not at all even on the table of discussion. I hadn't heard of it. No one else had, but it was, that rate study took into account the issues in capital improvement plan at that point in time.
Okay, so I guess this plan isn't just catching us up. This plan is for the future also. Is that correct?
I would definitely make that statement, yes. This adds more redundancy that the engineers and our operations staff tell us we absolutely need to have in the system.
Well,
I suppose you could argue that's catching up, but I would argue that that's operating the system as it's meant to be operated to provide better safety for all of our citizens.
Yeah, well, typically year after year you do improvements in that. I was just wondering that if in fact we're catching up, and when is the other shoe going to fall? That's my question. Because if this brings us up to the 5 years where we should be, what's the next shoe that's going to fall, so to speak?
I will try, and then if I don't get there, Bob's ready to try to jump in on that. We have two elements that we're looking at in the plan. And the elements here, if you will, that these utility rates are based on was the capital improvement plan, the integrated water master plan that the engineers went over with you. And what their statement is that those improvements are needed for the population today. If we don't add another building permit, if we don't add another customer, we need those redundancies and that today. With that having been said, we also will have growth in the community. The growth in the community would be funded by development impact fees is the strategy. We don't want to build that in the rates to the extent that we can avoid doing it. And I say to the extent we can avoid because, of course, you can't, if you've got 1,000 houses coming in over a year, you can't wait until all 1,000 of them are built and say, okay, now you can turn your water on. So you have to have some in advance. But this plan is not taking into account that. The growth factor is intended to be paid for primarily by development impact fees.
Does that answer your question?
No.
Okay. Is your concern that they'll have to go up again after the 5 years, even exponentially?
My concern is that we're 5 years behind, and now we threw a plan together,
right.
Loosely speaking, please.
Right, of course.
We put a plan in place to catch us up to where we should have been planning all along 5 years ago. Now, we're going to do these things, whether they're needed or not is not the issue at hand. The question is that, wow, we should have done this before. Mm-hmm. We're going to do it right now. We're going to ask for a whole bunch of money up front. And then with that, we hope that we don't squander that away like we may have done in the past, why we're in the situation that we are now. 5 years from now, we're going to be back at the table talking about a 62% increase again in water. I'm concerned that we didn't do what we said we were going to do up front 5 years ago, perhaps, and now we're getting we're getting a lot of money now. We're asking for a lot of money now. How do we know that there's not in another couple of years another big rate plan that's going to just wipe us out again?
After this one expires in 5 years, or after this one kind of goes its course.
3 years,
goes its course.
Yeah, you know,
okay.
the big push is in the first couple of years.
Okay. And
Member Zedek, could I?
Sure. Sure.
Let me try to rephrase how he's talking or what he's trying to say. The plan, I see it as containment. That's short term. I see it being tactical, saying going out 6 months to a year, and then we're looking at strategic, and I think that's more his question. Will this plan allow for our residents to have water 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 50 years from now? Maybe that's more of the direct question, and you may not be able to be the folks to answer. Maybe it's Mark in the back. But I think that's more geared towards that question. And we're talking about the plan, not the utility rate study, raising the rates. And so I see it covering for the next 5 years. I don't believe we are behind, but I want to know how far ahead are we going with this plan.
and you're just talking about the integrated.
That's accurate. Thank
okay.
you.
And you're just talking about the integrated water master plan, the CIP,
That's it.
the
That's
program
correct.
you're going to. Okay.
Right.
I'm wondering if it would be okay, Chairman, respectfully, if we could discuss that at the end after he finishes the alternatives, because that'll be the first thing we would have to discuss as we move forward. We'd have to be all okay with the CIP plan.
That would be okay. I just wanted to clear up the question.
I'd like to respond to that.
Okay. Okay, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Respond. Apologize.
Let's go back 5 years, the last integrated water master plan. We had just come off of a significant increase in growth. We had a boom ongoing, and we were in the midst of that. The focus and the direction for the consultant was to really assess the capacity and of the system to provide water to significantly increasing volumes of people that would be moving in new homes. Can we meet the demand? They did not do the level of inspection and review of the condition of the primary elements of the various systems, the wells, the treatment facilities, some of the infrastructure. That was part of the scope of this project. So you step back and say, well, what was the concern of the city at that time? The concern of the city was to provide water. They were worried about not having enough water to support the tremendous boom of residential properties primarily. So that was the focus of that, ensuring the capacity throughout the city would be met. And there were elements of that plan that talked about we need to increase the water supply. They went out and purchased water and turned water resources through an Indian Creek lease. So there was significant investments more on the supply side. Over the past 5 years, I think it would be fair to say that there was a lot of deferred maintenance that the operators wanted to make, but it all comes down to the rate analysis that you present to the customers. At that point, the priority was purchasing new water supplies and ensuring you could treat the wastewater demands that you saw upcoming for your system. 5 years later, we're looking at now more of a sustainability issue, not just making up for the last 5 years, but how do we build into our system the necessary improvements, the rehabilitation, the replacements, so that we can properly maintain the system, not just for 5 years, but for the next 10 to 15 years. These improvements last up to 30 to 60 years if you maintain them properly. That's the schedule that we need to be on. The question as far as where is our capacity right now, our best estimate based on our understanding of the growth trends that we're experiencing now and project for the next 10 years is somewhere between 9 and 12, maybe 14 years, if there's not the growth that we anticipate. Sooner, if the growth seems to pick up. So we have built in an element of growth, modest growth, for the next 5 years. So will we be back to the citizens, to the customers, asking for that when the other shoe drops? No, we feel that we built that incremental increase in this rate component. So can we emphasize on the reliability and the infrastructure improvement and repair? We think that's the prudent choice for the customer or for the system to place our money there. If we try to do both, the increase will go significantly higher than what you see there. So we're trying to give the customer what we believe are the most serious needs that need to be met now and over the next 5 years, to build our system up, not just to serve us for 5 years, but to last the next 20 years in terms of the condition of the infrastructure.
I want to ask just one question that while you were speaking, sir. When Corolla was here a few presentations ago, one of the points that they brought up about the way this was set up for the capital improvement project, this was just to get us up to the current population that we have right now. They specifically were asked, and they said, no, this is not for the next 5 years population. This is just to get us to the sustainability of what we currently have. And I think you just told us something different.
Let's ask if they...
He's right there.
Right behind you.
Right here. That's why.
Would you address that guy as first?
So the improvements that we've recommended are necessary to get you up to where you need to be for the population in right now and in the near term. It's not a projected demand for the future. And I do want to just clarify one thing, Bob, because I don't want anybody to get in trouble later. The only thing that we have not evaluated right now, because we haven't had the time to do, we didn't have the time to do it, was the model. We did not do the hydraulic modeling of the transmission system. So there may indeed need to be some improvements to water lines that we haven't been able to evaluate yet. So that's the only thing that might be something that needs to be looked at in addition to what you've already got. The process that we're in right now is to look at beyond 5 years and do an assessment for what you're going to need from that point forward. Those costs will be predominantly borne by impact fees. And then you know, whenever you're doing a master plan 5-10 years down the road, you're going to be doing a condition assessment again. You're going to be looking at where do we have vulnerabilities, because, you know, if it was up to the city to just design everything and tell all the developers where to go, we would have a perfect system. But that's not how it works. Landowners have their own rights to develop when they want to develop, where they want to develop. And so there's always these weird little inefficiencies that happen, and that's why you do master plans every 5 years, to fix those inefficiencies. So can we predict what the impacts are going to be to the rate plan 5 years from now? No, we can't. But we're doing the best we can to do this in the most organized way possible and cost effectively. To answer your specific question, this is for now. We're trying to meet the needs for right now, get you up to speed, get you up to par where you need to be, so the city's in a good position for when growth happens again. Right now, you're not. Whether it's residential or economic development, you're not in a good position to bring that in. We're trying to get you there with this plan.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Committee Member Wilson?
Yeah, I think what I'm getting at is, let's say that, you know, this brings us up for our population right now. But let's say because a developer comes in and builds a bunch of new homes somewhere, if that indicates the need for, let's say, another well, another pumping station, that would be an additional capital improvement that would be paid by the developable impact fees.
Ideally,
Okay, so that's I think answers a lot of that question
we're
there.
really trying to get you to that point where the city is in more of a control scenario with regard to the pattern of growth and responding to that growth, rather than being in a reactionary mode. And by the way, all of the cities were in that mode when they were adding 1,000 people a month back in the early 2000s. So it's not unique to Goodyear.
Any further questions, Committee Member Zednik?
No, other than I appreciate the clarification. So essentially, the other shoe hasn't fallen.
There's a little bit that may come in when we evaluate the transmission lines.
True.
And then the rest of those costs that we come up with for the longer range plan, those
haven't been identified.
But they won't show up in the rates. They'll show up in the impact fees, which is what the developers pay.
Vice Chair Battern?
Excuse me, one more. Can we go forward with the two, and then we'll get to the Vice and myself? Head over
Sure.
to Jake, and then Marge and the rest of the team.
So do you want Jake next?
Yeah,
That's okay.
Just follow that, and we'll be at the end.
Just follow. Committee Member Sharp. That's you want next? Okay, Committee Member Sharp.
You know, we'll never make it there.
Well, I'll try not to delay it too long. I'm a little confused about the hydrology report, because that was one of my questions earlier about that, and I was told that that's the delivery system and the transmission lines. And I did have a conversation with Mark about the budget for that, but I'm still a little confused as to whether that would be an impact fee or affect the rates.
The
Could
question
you
is that hydraulic
clarify?
modeling, would that affect the rates or the?
The hydrology report has to do with the condition of the lines.
Would that, of Mark Holmes?
So if I understand your question correctly, you're asking about the hydraulic or the hydrogeologic analysis for well siting?
Well, it's the transmission lines, it's the delivery
it's the
system, from what I just heard from
So the
Colorado.
hydraulic model that Guy referenced, that has not been done, or are you referring to the transmission system from CAP deliveries?
No, not CIP
Okay.
deliveries. The hydrological report
Groundwater, well spacing, and all of that.
has to do with all of that, yeah.
Okay, so if it's a well spacing, so that's a hydrogeologic study. So looking at the groundwater, physical availability, the location of the various wells that are not just city-owned, but they're private wells, they're domestic, they're Liberty utility wells, they're other wells that are within specific distances from newly proposed wells. So that study, if you're asking the question about what does that entail, it looks at the geographic area that the city can actually go out and drill wells that would be available to put a well that would not impact other well owners.
Didn't Corolla just say, though, that the hydrological report has to do with transmission
I think you're
lines?
misconstruing. What Guy is referring to is a hydro model, which looks at pressurizing pipes and pumps and reservoirs, and Guy can speak more on that. That's what has not been done yet because it takes considerable time to look at your entire infrastructure and then develop the model.
That's what I'm concerned about.
So I think you'll need to answer.
Okay, so we were hired to very quickly do an assessment so that we could, in tandem with economist.com, get the rate plan done for the first 5 years. We did not, in order to do a hydraulic model of the system, imagine building like a Lego model of the entire city to try to like pretend, it's like Sim City. You're trying to create a pretend model or a pretend system that represents your pipes. We didn't have enough time or energy or effort to do that in the first 3 months. So when we did our evaluation, we did everything, we looked at everything except for that hydraulic model. So the only thing that might show up later, and it'll be probably in about 4 or 5 months that we'll start to know this, the only thing that we think that might be in addition to what we've already given you is, let's say there's a 16-inch line that probably ought to be a 24-inch line. The upsizing of lines, there might be some sewer lines that we say might have, not enough capacity. They're surging and they're causing problems from an operation and maintenance standpoint. Those things have not been looked at, but the likelihood of them having a huge percentage impact to this $57 million CIP is fairly low because we're not seeing significant problems right now, as I understand it, in transmission capacity or collection system capacity, if I'm right about that. A little bit in the collection system. So there might be some more sewer pipe improvements that need to be added. But the likelihood is that you're going to be able to rely on these rates. And remember, the rates are going to be raised. They're paying for a capital program over 30 years at a particular interest rate. And we are also going to be finding out how right we are about these prices. I mean, we're doing these based on recent bid tabs, but as I told you before when we gave our presentation, there's some assumptions in here. We don't know if you're going to need full treatment on some of these wells. We don't know that, but we're putting the money in there in case you do, so you don't have to go back to the ratepayers and ask for more money. So we're about as right as we can be about these capital costs, but in 5 years, we'll be able to look at it again, and we'll see what kind of efficiencies we've gained. We might not have to do anything to the rates to pay for whatever pipeline improvements have to happen.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
Committee Member Hinman? Thank you, Guy.
I'm going to save mine for the next.
All right. Committee Member, Alternate Zednik, I apologize.
Well, this is, to me, a little more, I'm going to say comfortable, because in one of your presentations, you were talking about how long it's going to take for the permits and how long it's going to take to get a drilling team and a well team to come in. And if the capital improvements are going to remain the same, so you're not talking about that. They're going to, even though it's going to take a year and a half to get all these in, we're still collecting the money up front. It's front-ended, but to the tune of 14% versus the 25%.
That's correct. Yes, that's basically correct. Because where you're cutting back on your expenses is in your line oversizing and in your budget supplementals and in your cap water allocations. You're not cutting back any of the capital improvement plan. So that this alternative plan enables you to still fully go forward with the capital improvement plan. That's the real benefit of it. The downside of this plan is that you're going to have less money up front for cap water allocations. You're going to have less money up front for the budget supplementals. You'll just have to phase that in over a longer period of time. Now, look, this is not unusual. I mean, in any business, you have to balance what you think you need to spend with how much money you think you're going to receive. And it's very common that when departments of any corporation submit their budgets, they don't necessarily get all the money they ask for. So this plan, this alternative plan, really does help smooth out the rate adjustments. It certainly lessens the rate shock. I can tell you as a rate consultant that it tends to be a plan that, from my experience, tends to be more acceptable to ratepayers when the rate adjustments are more constant. In the first couple of years, the adjustments are a little bit more than the average around the country, which is 5 to 6% a year for most utilities. But it's not out of the ordinary, and it certainly is not disproportionate to what many utilities in the state of Arizona are doing, including your neighbors next door in Buckeye, who just did a very significant rate adjustment. So, rate adjustments are a fact of life. The only question is how much is going to be deemed to be acceptable to the ratepayers.
But with the money just sitting there up front, it has a tendency to disappear. I mean, you're collecting this money up front. If you don't if it doesn't go out and into those capital improvements right away, it has a tendency to disappear. So to me, that's a little negative, collecting all the money up front.
Okay, if I could maybe address that, if you would look on pages let's look at page 15. That one happens to be the water where the numbers are a little bigger.
And Larry, if I can interject real fast, remember that this alternative too was in response to your request to level it. Okay, I just didn't want you to think they just kind of came up with it. Okay,
Right.
go ahead.
No,
Larry.
it was, but there was a discussion on the capital improvement plan. Actually, we as a staff, maybe I want to tell you a little bit about how Dan built and changed his numbers. After we met last week, Dan and I got in the corner and said, okay, do this, 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 and this, and it was based on that. We did not move the capital improvement plan. Dan had to get this done and back to you in a week. The capital improvement plan, and I just want to show you a little bit of how this works to address the question that you're asking now. If you look on page 15, where that really gets paid for is in the debt service unfunded capital improvement line, okay? The very first year that hits us is fiscal year 17. It doesn't affect fiscal year 16. Actually, what we've talked about as a staff, and kind of, we're leaving that at a discussion when we get to agenda item A, but I think you bring it up now, and something for you as a group to discuss when we get there. By the time we implement this plan and it goes into effect, it's January 1st. And this comes to a question we were asked, can we realistically do everything? Well, between now and June 30th of 2016, the most we can do is some design services. We aren't going to build all of that infrastructure that's in there. So as a staff, what we're looking at is shifting everything back 1 year, because it's really 6 months to get started. So what we're going to do in fiscal year 16, we would move to fiscal year 17 and adjust that. What impact would that have on the 2016 rate increase? It wouldn't have any impact. What it would have an impact on is, as you suggested, it would lower the interest that we would pay in fiscal year 17 and so forth. That's an option the committee can discuss. And the other thing, to give you a little comfort on what will happen to that money, federal tax law basically requires us to spend the money for the purposes that we sell it for within a restricted period of time, which is 3 years. And so you can't, City of Goodyear would never sell bonds that would be for any other purpose than infrastructure. Never have, never would. I say you can't, but we know certain cities, Chicago, maybe hypothetically, have done that, but we don't do that. It would only go for specific infrastructure.
Thank you. Is that pretty much
Perfect.
it? Okay. Do you have any more questions, Committee Members? Committee Member Pangrazi, any questions?
No. But basically what it is that the money can only be spent for what it's labeled at. And so if it sits there for another 6 months, it sits there for another 6 months, depending on where the planning is and how long it takes to get the project to bid and all those other things before it can actually be built. So, yeah.
Thank you.
But it won't be lost.
Vice Chair Battern.
Dan, you always find something to rile me up. Just to clarify, Buckeye hadn't had an rate increase in approximately 30 years, so they got a lot of catching up to do. I don't think we should be in that boat. First off, I want to say I appreciate the alternate too, because I know I specifically asked for this as well. Thank you for the efforts on it. It looks a lot closer to what I think is acceptable from a customer standpoint. That being said, I do have 2 quick questions for Mark Seaman and Mark Holmes. First one would be for Mr. Holmes, and that is, under our alternate 2 summary, does that continue the current cap allotment that we get? Or does it reduce what we're picking up?
So the delay in the CAP revenues from the rates would basically delay us in ordering enough CAP initially for all of our water demands. So if our water demands, say, for example, are 9,000 acre feet, we have about, I forget the number, but let's say it's $1 million. Requires 9,000 acre, it might be $1.8 million. So we'd be shy of meeting our full demands, minimally our demands for replenishment obligation requirements. So we would have to go into the city's long-term storage credit bank account and find the additional water and use that to meet the difference.
Under alternate 2 summary?
Correct.
Okay.
But eventually by year 5, you are getting, you're approaching at year 5 the total demand number. So again, it's just sliding it out and smoothing that, because the CAP charges are one of the driving factors for the rate increases.
Right, and they're not getting cheaper anytime soon.
Correct, that's
Yes.
correct.
Okay, that helped a lot on that question. The other one was for Mr. Siemens. And this question is operator to operator. We do this work. This 5-year plan, particularly the alternate 2 summary, that's going to push some stuff back, take a little longer to get stuff in the ground, what we know. At the end of this, and you've obviously been involved with this, giving your opinion on what we need out there, talking to the operators firsthand, does this plan that you see, in your honest opinion, as an operator of record for the city, you are the operator of record, right?
I'm not officially the operator of record, but some of my staff are.
Okay. What I want to know is, does this give you the confidence, this plan to put in the capital improvement equipment, does it give you the redundancy, the security when you go to sleep at night, that we're where we need to be as a city? Because my personal belief is I don't think it's easy to sleep on some nights when something goes wrong, like a water line breaks. Does this give you that feeling of comfort if we get this in the ground?
It does, because as was stated earlier, the CIP portion of this is not affected. It's the cap water allocation. So everything that we presented in the CIP to get us to even, that we've talked about before, is covered under this rate plan. So it's what we feel comfortable with. Absolutely. Okay. Operator to operator. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
That was all.
Thank you. Chairman Columbia.
Okay. So that I understand what Bob mentioned earlier, talking about sustainability, 10 to 15 years. If we maintain it well, we're looking 30 to 60 years, and that's what we're talking about, all the capital equipment that we're proposing with this plan. That's correct?
Yeah, generally speaking, there's lifespan. The equipment varies based on the type of equipment that you're talking about.
Right now, I'm trying to go down the path of here we getting ready to release or talk about $54.9 million total in this plan, and this plan is to bring us current. But one thing I think we're all missing is that this equipment will last quite a long time. Yes. And that's one thing that we're not talking about. We're talking about, I hear spending versus investment. This is an investment for the city. And I think that I just want to throw that out there for all my committee members. It's an investment. We need to do this investment. I think I threw Bob off a little bit there.
Bob,
asking for
he's looking for an
clarification
amen.
Larry.
Amen. I was just, to emphasize your point, I was looking at, checking with Larry, that $200 million is the value of the system. $280 million is really the system that we have to maintain. So the value that we are asking for spread over those 5 years is not too unreasonable for the amount of maintenance and repair that you should perform to keep your system in good operating order.
I would agree. Typically when my engineers will come to me and they'll ask for a plan. They got a project plan in front of them, and I'll ask them the question, is this spending or is this an investment? Mm-hmm. And again, I want to visit that. I want everybody to understand this is an investment. Right. I know we're all hitting you folks hard to try to get a 20 to 50-year commitment. That's very difficult to do unless more studies are made. But, so I see this as an investment, and I really appreciate you folks putting together this alternate two summary. This is exactly, what I was looking for. I'm sure the rest of the committee members were as well. So I'll stop right there, and I'm sure I'll have more questions later on.
Okay, we're going to let Dan continue. Next, he's going to show you the multifamily customer class. That was another thing that was brought up at the last committee meeting, so this is in response to that. And then we'll have time for questions.
Sure. And I'll be relatively brief on this. It's not uncommon for cities to assess a inverted block or conservation-based rate for its residential customers, but to have a uniform rate for its non-residential, commercial, and multifamily customers. The logic is that residential customers are assumed to have greater ability to conserve water. They have more discretionary water usage. A family, how does a family use water? In the summertime, they water their lawn or they wash their car or something like that. In the wintertime, they don't. But a business or a commercial entity that uses water is perceived as using all the water for the purposes of their business, and so they don't have the same ability to conserve. Also, commercial customers tend to have greater variation in their usage. You will have certain commercial customers that will literally use 500,000 gallons of water in a month because they've got a large campus or a factory, Campbell's soup factory or something like that. And then you'll have other commercial customers like a small family-owned flower shop in a retail shopping center that only use a few thousand gallons a month. So there tends to be a much greater variation among commercial customer usage as well. The question came up with regards to both commercial and multifamily usage. What would happen if the city decided to implement a uniform rate? What would the impact? What would that rate be, and how would it impact certain classes of users? Well, what we did is we went back to our rate model, and we looked at what we call a revenue-neutral alternative. If you were to implement a uniform rate for your multifamily and your commercial customers, what would that rate be? This chart right here shows that at present, your multifamily customer class and the commercial rates are the same, but the multifamily customer class pays a rate of $3.30 for the first 40,000 gallons per 1,000 gallons. That rate goes up to $5.28 for between 40 and 100,000 gallons, and it goes up to $6.86 beyond 100,000 gallons. This is the rate adjustment that would be required under the Alternative 2 rate plan. However, if you decided to implement a uniform rate, we calculate that uniform rate would be $7.20 per 1,000 gallons. That's right about where you would expect it to be. In other words, it would be somewhere between the second and the third block. And as you can see, in future years, that rate would go up accordingly. Now, there are advantages and disadvantages of having a uniform-based multifamily rate. Obviously, one of the advantages is that it no longer, quote, discriminates, unquote, against high-volume users. However, one thing to keep in mind, whenever you change a rate design, you run the risk of creating or of disproportionately impacting certain of your customers. In other words, if you go from a block-based rate to a uniform rate, some people are going to get impacted more than others based on how much water they use. For example, so looking at the multifamily class. If you're a multifamily unit that uses 50,000 gallons right now, you pay $225 a month. Under the inverted block rate, that amount would go to $295 a month, but under the uniform rate, it would go to $433 a month. In other words, a relatively low-volume multifamily user would see a very significant increase in their monthly usage. Why is that? Well, because they were used to paying $3.96 for the first 40,000 gallons. Now they're paying $7.20 for everything. So the rate would go up significantly. Now, the break-even level would be about 275,000 gallons a month. In other words, if you're a multifamily unit and you use 275,000 gallons, you'd pay about the same under either scenario. But if you're a large volume multifamily customer and you use, say, 600,000 gallons a month, then you would actually see your rate go significantly lower, because under the inverted block rate, your rate would go from $3,200 a month to $4,129 a month, but under the uniform rate, it would only go up to $3,898. It would go up under any circumstance, but it would go up a lot less under the uniform rate than it would under the inverted block rate. So that's something to keep in mind when you evaluate changing a rate structure. It's going to impact different customers differently. In other words, if you go from a block rate to a uniform rate, your low-volume customers are going to be disproportionately impacted, but your high-volume customers are going to see a much more modest adjustment in their monthly bills. That's the impact on the monthly charge, and that really concludes my presentation for tonight.
All right. Questions related to that piece, the multifamily and the commercial? I'm going to start on this side. Is that okay if I start on this side? All right. I start with Committee Member Pancrazzi. Do you have any questions about the multifamily?
No.
Committee Member Zednik?
I just need a clarification. When you say multifamily, are these metered individually buildings or sub-metered, whatever? Are they apartment homes, condos?
They tend to be apartment homes. They've got a meter going into the apartment home, and the city bills on the meter itself. Now, John, you want to talk about that at all?
3 or more units.
3 or more units. So there can be a variation in what is termed a multifamily rate. Could be as little as 3 units. Could be as many as, 100 units, right?
Yeah, I do have a question.
Yes.
Are all of Goodyear's multifamily, are they all individually metered? Or are there group meters, or they're big, huge, 1 meter for a huge?
All of them have, some of them have 2 meters for one complex, just depending on the complex. We do have one area that has 2-inch meters that serve 3 different buildings. So it just depends on the size of the complex.
Okay, but each little apartment doesn't have its own meter.
No.
It's the building itself that has the meter.
Right.
And inside their rent is the water rate. I mean, their water is in there, and the owner of that building pays commercial rates.
Correct.
Same as a mobile home park or anything like that.
Say that I didn't quite.
Same
hear.
as
Mobile home park is
Mobile home park would be
Commercial.
multifamily, commercial.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
So the owner divides up supposedly,
That you
ideally
would have to
divides
talk
up
to
the
the
bill if
individual
there's 2
owners.
or 3 people in each unit, or how many people are in the unit. He divides, or they divide up the bill, and
Yeah, I don't know how each complex, I don't know if.
I think Committee Member Hinman is
Yes.
eager to help out.
Try to help.
Yes.
So it's going to depend on the property, usually the age of the property. A lot of newer properties have a master meter, like John was alluding to, where they may have 2 or 3 meters, and then they'll have essentially sub-meters go to the individuals. The city only looks at, obviously, the master meter, and then the property owner can look at the sub-meters for actual billing. For older properties that aren't sub-metered, there's also what we call a ratio utility billing system, which is outlined in state statute, and it provides guidelines that if you aren't sub-metered, this is how you divide up your water bill. So it's actually prescribed in statute how a landlord can divide up the water bill.
Thank you.
And that's usually based on square footage and I think number of occupants, but there's some guidelines.
Okay, it's outlined there.
Now I have another question. Okay, so is their rent, does it include their water, or is it usually rent plus what their utilities are?
Mr. Chair, that's going to depend probably on the situation. Again, if they're sub-metered, I would imagine the property manager is just going to pass the bill straight through to the resident. And if it's not sub-metered, then they're probably going to include it in the rent,
Got it.
based on
How
the rough
much
situation.
Yeah,
that's provided
average
in
use and all
statute.
that kind of stuff, yeah.
We're all square there? Committee Member Hinman.
All right.
Your thoughts?
Thank you. So thank you for looking into this. I really do appreciate it. I do have some questions on page 20. And I did do some quick math, which is never a good thing. But just kind of looking at some of the assumptions, and Dan, I'll just use your 7,000 gallons per the single family, and I'll just translate that over to the multifamily. So for purposes of that, if you look at just for example, the 500,000 gallon situation, which I think is kind of a reasonable sample for the purpose of this conversation, if you assume 7,000 gallons per unit, that would give you approximately 71 units. And so when you divide out the 71 units from your effective rate, based on the uniform effective rate of $38.98, you would get about $54. The customer would receive a bill about $54.91, which compared to your single family water rate, the alternative summary of $29.46 is obviously significantly higher. So I guess perhaps my first question would be, A, do you agree with my math? And B, if you do, then is that, as you alluded to at the beginning of the presentation, just and reasonable in terms of?
Well, I can't comment on your math because I haven't had a chance to look at it, obviously. I do think it's not unreasonable that you might end up with a commercial or a multifamily rate being greater per unit than you would for a residential family. There's a lot of reasons for that. First of all, the peaking factors tend to be different for multifamily units than they are for residential units, so there could be some cost differentials. Secondly, not all of the rates that the city charges are based strictly on the cost of service. There are some rate designs that are recovering a little bit less than their cost of service, and there are other customer or classes that are recovering a little bit more than their cost of service. For example, I will tell you right out, your residential customer class is right now recovering a little less than its cost of service, and your commercial customer class is recovering a little bit more. If you wanted to fix that problem, first of all, if you term it a problem, because this is very common in rate making, that where some customer classes pay a little bit less and other customer classes pay a little bit more, you would be looking at implementing a very significant increase on your residential customers and potentially even a very much more modest increase on your commercial customers. Now, the other thing to keep in mind, particularly with multifamily and commercial customers, is that multifamily and commercial customer accounts have the ability to write off their water bills on their taxes. And so what that means is Uncle Sam is basically paying 20 to 30% of the water bill for a commercial customer and a non-residential customer. So many cities use that as justification for charging a little bit more to a commercial customer because the net amount that customer is out tends to even up. But the bottom line is this: not every rate that's charged by the city of Goodyear is based strictly on the cost of service. Some are recovering a little more, and some are recovering a little bit less.
Well, Mr. Chair.
Go. No,
in terms of the last point about the write-off, I can't really speak to that point. I would just say if the landlord passes on the bill to the resident, I just don't know how they would write that off. But I could be wrong. I just haven't really explored that. In terms of the cost of service, we've heard arguments probably both ways. We can point to studies that suggest multifamily properties are more efficient because you have condensed property that you're not paying for miles of pipes to reach to large expanses of subdivisions or what have you. So we've seen it on both sides. But if you are going to use a cost of service analysis, then I would ask, do you have that cost of service analysis that points to the multifamily?
I can tell you right off, based on my recollection of the model, that right now the residential customer class in the city of Goodyear is right now paying a little less than its cost of service. And the commercial and the multifamily customers are paying a little more than their cost of service. So if you wanted to reach a state of pure equity like what you're suggesting, you would have to recommend a much more significant increase on the residential customers.
Well, sorry, Mr. Chair. For one, I would suggest, I think rate equity is rate equity, whether it's, it's hard for me to justify that a multifamily customer and apartment resident should be paying significantly more, especially when we're potentially saying $54 versus $29. I would say that's a significant rate discrepancy. If there's a cost of service study to justify it, then I guess that's a different story. But absent of that, I think it's hard to justify essentially almost a $25 rate difference.
Remember, the $25 rate differential is based on some very broad assumptions you made, which I haven't really had a chance to review. And so I can't sign off on that, on there being a discrepancy of that amount.
I was just using the 7,000 gallons per unit.
Again, I don't know if that pertains to a multifamily customer or not, because you also need to keep in mind the fact that there are multifamily units that do a lot of irrigation. And so, if they've got large lots, large green fields around their buildings, they may be irrigating that too. So you could potentially see a circumstance where the amount of usage per unit is greater than the amount of usage in a residential family. I just don't know.
Right.
So I can't
But
just
to
off
that
the
point
top.
of the irrigation,
Right.
doesn't Goodyear have a separate rate classification for irrigation? And
It does if the
And if they go-
multifamily unit has a separate irrigation meter.
And I
But if
think-
they don't,
I think
Then it's
most
all
do.
commercial.
I would say I haven't looked at
again,
the
that's an
7 or so properties.
The problem is
Goodyear,
that's
but I
another
would-
assumption,
Right.
and we can't say for sure whether or not that assumption is correct or not.
And I would-
So, I don't think there's any doubt that there's a
Right.
discrepancy between what a multifamily customer is paying and what a residential customer is paying. But I can't at this point in time say that it's significant or that it's substantial or that immediate action is required until far more research is done than just making a few broad assumptions.
Well, then, Mr. Chair, then I would say that probably is two ways that you couldn't make that assumption to justify this vast discrepancy. I mean, if you're saying that I can't justify it based off of, not knowing whether or not the multifamily property, how many have separate meters for irrigation, then I would say that the argument could go both ways. So in light of the fact that perhaps we don't have all the supporting data to justify this significant rate discrepancy, perhaps we need to err on the side of fairness and maybe adjust them down. But that's certainly
Just what down?
So-
probably the overall effective rate, unless you have something to justify a $25 rate difference.
Well, and once again, I don't agree with the $25 because I don't think that's been supported yet. Secondly, the other thing is that the discrepancy would be more one of increasing the residential rate. So the argument you're adopting is one that would require a far more significant increase on the residential customers. If that's the assumption or that's the recommendation you want to make, that's clearly your prerogative. But fixing or reaching equity is going to be more than just taking care of the multifamily customers. It's going to mean increasing the rates on the residential customers all that much more. Is that something you support?
And I'm going to ask if only because we have a time dedicated to talking about this very topic on the rate structure, so maybe that might be that way that you can all have the dialogue and see. Would that be okay, Committee Member? Okay.
Thank you.
Committee Member Sharp, any questions regarding the multifamily? No?
I was
Okay.
so embroiled
Okay.
in this conversation.
And then
I
I'm-
forgot I had to have a cry. I don't have a
Okay.
good.
And then Committee Member Wilson, any questions? We got Committee Member Menarek?
I would like some verification, if you would, about the tax benefit. Because 4 months ago, when Member Hinman made his statement, I was not in sympathy. But I am in more sympathy with the position today than I was then. But the counter tax benefit, that intrigues me as a counterpoint to Mr. Hinman. So I'd be interested to have that information, not tonight, but it would help me determine how supportive I am of Mr. Member Hinman's position, which...
Well, sir, it's a general statement. A commercial business that gets a water bill can expense that water bill on their income statement. So what that means is that if they have a $200 water bill and they have a 30% tax rate, then theoretically $66 of that water bill is paid for by a lower tax. Every individual business is going to be impacted differently. It just depends on what's the level of revenue of the business, what's the level of tax they're going to be paid. It's just a general statement. I don't know that there is any way of quantifying it to any greater extent. A commercial business can write off its water bill. Residents can't. That's all there is to it.
Yeah. Well, that's it on that.
Okay. Committee Member Passion?
Nothing right now.
No? Committee Member Scheid?
I just had one question. Do we have a rough idea in the city of Goodyear about how many multifamily accounts we have? How many people are we talking about versus our 15,000 residents? It doesn't have to be accurate.
How many multifamily accounts we have?
I have a rough idea.
How many multifamily accounts we have about?
You might know that better than you, right? Multifamily, no, we're
Oh, looks like Mr. Carpenter might have the answer
Be
for
a
you
high
right here.
estimate. 36. Okay.
36,000?
36.
36.
Oh, 36 units.
Multifamily
Okay.
accounts.
Thank you.
But Mr. Chair, to clarify, is that accounts or is that properties?
Yeah, I was just about to ask
Properties. So that would be accounts in whole.
But that could be 1 meter for 100.
Right. So you could have essentially three accounts per property or three.
Oh, you can have more than one account per property is what you're asking?
Right.
You could
Yeah,
have.
okay, I see lots of nods back there.
No, we typically don't do that. So you might have one account, but you might have 4 meters on that one account.
I wasn't aware that, quite frankly, Mr. Chair, I apologize, that Goodyear had 36 multifamily properties, but I guess that then goes in the definition of what you consider a multifamily property. Because I
3 or more.
Because
Three or
just
more
have the
I could
deer
be
run.
wrong, but 36 properties seems high. But
Like you said, I know that the.
right, okay.
Guess we can't answer your question quite as accurately.
It gives me a rough idea. Like I said, we have roughly 15,000 residential customers, and we have, it looks like 36 accounts, probably would actually be in less than multifamily. So, thanks.
Committee Member Zednick?
Good.
Good. Vice Chair Battern?
More than I ever wanted to know. Thank you.
Oh, tonight. Chairman Columbia?
I want to just go back to what we're talking about, these accounts. You said 36 accounts. Is that 36 meters or 36 accounts? Or can a count have 3 meters?
Count could have 3 meters.
Could have 3 meters. And what was the, what's the population? I don't know if this is the right way to question this. What, how many people are we talking about here?
That number I wouldn't know off the
wouldn't
top
know.
of my head.
Okay. And then another thing is that an apartment building could have, if you're living in an apartment, you're probably going to use less water. But what I heard earlier, someone mentioned about some grass, trees, those sorts of things. So does it come in on 1 meter and then it spreads out? How does that work again? I think somebody was going down that path here earlier.
Most have a separate landscape meter and they're charged at the irrigation rate.
And do we know that landscaping, and you probably don't, I don't know if you can answer this, but is that a cost to that landscaping, or the cost of the water to use for landscaping, is that shared amongst the multifamily units?
I would assume yes, but I wouldn't know
assume
the
yes.
answer to that question.
All right. So then that's an issue that the multifamily association would take up with their individual owners to try to bring the cost down as well. That's an angle they can take other than us trying to take the angle or try to take that path. Right?
Correct.
That's it.
Oh, that's it? Okay. All right, I think now it's time for discussion if I've got the agenda down right. Because we haven't had enough of that. No, I'm just kidding.
Questions, yes.
Yes. So if you would indulge me for a second, Anna has this kind of matrix that kind of helps us understand, where we need to move or how we can move through this as a suggestion of some things that we need to kind of first order discussion we need to have as we build up to the utility rate. So the thought was, first we'll talk about or make a decision or just discuss the master plan, so the CIP program, and make a recommendation for all or some of that 5-year plan, because that feeds into the rate plan. So we'd have to have agreement on that in some form or fashion. And then next we would talk about and hopefully have some agreement on a rate structure. So does it exist as it does today? Does it have multifamily components? Does it have the CAP water rate as separate? Kind of some of the things we talked about last time. And that's in block D. So your second column, we were trying to kind of synthesize some of the discussion last time. So in D, it was the multifamily, should it be a separate rate class, the commercial rates as block, the cap water rates, and the cap as a separate line item. So what?
Wait 1 second.
Yes.
Do we have that on a slide format?
Can we put this on Elmo? Okay, well, I don't know how to use Elmo.
We're all looking around. And
Sorry about that. No, thank you. We meant to do that. And I'm going to steal Larry's. I'm going to steal Larry's. Teresa, what?
Yeah. And they had the black thing. Yeah.
There we go.
why is it not?
Now zoom
Can we,
it.
yeah, there we go.
No, it's sad.
Oh, well.
I can program a VCR.
focus.
Well, that's still good enough, yeah. We can just move it around as we need it. Yeah, we can just move the paper around. So, so that second one will be discussing the utility rate structure. Is it the existing? Does it have any of these other components? Then we'd need to move on to that action on recommendations for future water needs. And that was the discussion everybody was asking about last time, the oversizing of the lines. Remember how we were asking to look into that. Then the next piece, and all these will go into the final one, which is the utility rates. So the E would be discuss and consider action on the draft utility rates and what that looks like. Alternative 1, the alternative 2, whatever that looks like. I did? Oh, sorry. And then once we've kind of discussed and come to some form of agreement on that, the final piece was a lot of these things that came up over the course of our time together, where they might be conservation-based, or maybe about swimming pools was one that comes to mind. The reclaimed water, those are things that won't necessarily impact directly right now the utility rates, but are certainly something that you may want looked into. So having those in this final column, and there's several. So I don't know if you've had a moment to look at those, but is that an okay way to kind of approach this whole discussion tonight, to kind of piece it out so that we can attack the elephant one bite at a time?
Great.
Okay. All right, so let's start with the CIP, the plan that you saw with all the components, and we've talked a lot about. I'm trying to decide whether that is something we want to implement all, some. What do we think about that? I don't know if we want to do a round robin once again.
I think round
Start at one?
robin works.
All right. I'll start. Did I start with you last time, Committee Member Wilson? Is it time for me to switch? Okay, it's you first then, I think. So, Committee Member Wilson. No questions, no thoughts, no position?
Teresa, excuse me 1 minute. Can we go through it just one more time? I see everybody
Sure.
just kind of.
Sure, the table?
We're going to be doing this.
Yes, okay. So here's the way we thought we could piece it out. And if it doesn't make sense, just tell me. I don't mind, just yell and say, I don't know what you're talking about. So one of the pieces that feeds into the rate is the CIP program. Remember, that's the capital improvement plan? Yes, that's that first column.
If you look in the first column A, underneath A, it says recommend the city implement some sort of or all the recommendations in the 5-year CIP. Okay?
So, and the reason we need to agree on that, or have some agreement on it, is because it feeds into the actual rate. Because if we say no, we don't want, or yes, we want, then it changes the way the rate is. Does that make sense? Okay. So then the second piece would be the existing rate structure, and that's that second column. It's actually labeled D, like Delta, and it says discuss and consider action on the city's existing utility rate structure. And some things you might consider as a committee are those items that you've talked about previously, one being the multifamily, the other was being the commercial rates as blocks instead of tiers, the other being the CAP water rate, and the fourth one being that it being an actual separate line item on the bill. So once we have discussion on that, if I'm boring you, let me know. I can. Okay, once we have discussion on that, then we would go to the third column, which would, so at each of these columns would actually have a motion. Someone would say, I move, like Committee Member Zednik would say, I move that we approve the CIP plan as is. And then someone would second, and then we'd move to the next column. Does that make sense? Yes? Committee Member Sharp, does that make sense? Okay.
Yeah, let's discuss first and get it out on the table then.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go ahead and start with the CIP plan. I was talking to Committee Member Wilson. So if you don't have any questions or thoughts, do you have a thought either way as to whether you think that the entire plan should be something that we look at or pieces of it? What are your thoughts on that?
I don't have a thought at this time.
No thought at this time? Okay. Committee Member Menard, I'm going to let you off easy for a second.
With real reservation that I don't have enough information, I'm inclined to fully support the CIP.
Okay. Committee Member Passion?
I would also support fully the CIP.
Okay. Committee Member Scheid?
I would fully support it also. I've looked extensively at the water portion in particular because that's my forte, and there's a real need, especially in that first phase, to get some immediate help for the water system. So between storage and trying to get you some additional wells and studies here, some of the wells here are putting out maybe 35% of the water that you can replace it with a new well. So particularly from the water side, I think we really need to look at the CIP, and I think we need to adopt it.
Okay, thank you. Committee Member Zednik?
I agree with what Pete said without having full knowledge of everything completely. I guess I would support some of it because I'm sure that there's some portions in there that may be able to be refined.
Committee member, well, shall I start with the alternates? I'm going to have to ask Anna.
It's voting. We're not voting, we're discussing.
Right,
So
right,
you
so
can't,
that's why I was-
you can go to them.
Right, that's what I was asking. Okay. Committee member,
I'm all in favor of the CIP being funded. That's all there is to it. It's an investment. It's not an expense.
Committee member Zednik?
I'm in favor. I'm a little hazy about the computer systems, the DMOM and the SCADA or whatever supervisory, because that costs millions of dollars from what I read. But we need to move with the water part and the wells, and so
Okay. Thank you.
I'll support it.
Committee member Hinman?
I support.
Support. Committee member Sharp?
I support it with reservations that some of the things I asked for were not brought out, except that from what I heard from the engineering is that everything in the CIP is urgent. And that there's nothing that can be staggered, that it's all urgent. So I would go ahead and support that.
Okay. Vice Chair Battern?
I would be inclined to support it in full with the stipulation, as I brought up to Mr. Beckley and the Marks, about watching some of the costs. That they're, it's my point being that we've kind of grabbed costs, and I believe they're close to what they're probably going to be, but after reviewing it, and we really want to make sure we keep an eye on those costs, that what we approve today doesn't end up doubling by down the road. But I think there's no question as to the city's needs for this equipment, so I would support it.
Okay. Chairman Columbia?
As I stated earlier, we have to look at whether it's spending or investment. This is an investment, so I support it.
Okay. I think then we want to take go ahead and take a motion to kind of get this one off the table. Is that okay if I accept that motion, Anna, or do we need to go back to the chair? I can do that? Okay.
She can? Okay, go ahead.
Either.
Okay, Teresa, go ahead.
Okay. I'll take a motion for recommendation to implement.
Point of order.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, on these motions, respectfully, I would ask that you preside on the motion, sir, under Article 3, or excuse me, under Article 4, 6, AC, where you preside. I know that we've had a facilitator, but just a point of order, sir, that you preside over the meeting, and you have, but I don't want it, the point of order is I don't want to give the impression, the appearance of impropriety. So if you would accept the motions, I think it would give the appearance publicly of an independent committee making a recommendation. The point of order is Article 4, Section 6, AC.
Committee member Minerick? Yes. I'll take it from here.
Chairman?
Excuse me, let me read the voting and the recommendation.
I apologize. I was just handed a note that there are members of the public here. I didn't know at what point we wanted to ask if they had questions or comments on the cards because we finished the presentation. After the motion.
Then they get to discuss.
And they can discuss. Okay.
You move, you discuss.
All right, so we're on item 6.5. I'll read this. Discuss and consider action on recommendations on various master plans, including but not limited to the city's integrated water master plan, the IWMP update. Okay, voting shall be done by voice vote. If the results of a voice vote are not readily discernible by the secretary, a roll call vote shall be taken. Any member of the committee may call for a roll call vote in lieu of a voice vote. Okay. So I need, can I have a motion from, so let me back up here for a moment. Can I have a motion to recommend the city implementation some or all of the recommendations in the 5-year CIP?
So moved.
Chairman.
I went
You beat me
fast.
to it, go ahead.
Try that again.
So moved.
Okay. Committee, I have a motion from Committee Member Wilson and a second.
Second.
Second from Committee Member Scheid. Any discussions?
Point of order, would you read the motion again, Mr. Chairman?
Read it just like it is. Okay. Recommend the city implement some or all of the recommendations in the 5-year CIP.
Point of order. Shouldn't it be all? When we were
That's
talking,
correct. Sorry.
not just some, but all.
Right, we're doing all. Sorry.
Thank you.
Thanks for the correction.
I was just ready to make an amendment to the motion.
Sorry. Okay.
I need a motion to amend.
No, would you please, point of order, sir, Mr. Chairman, would you please read the motion again?
Okay, without the, okay. Recommend the city implement all of the recommendations in the 5-year CIP.
Can I have Jerry and Leonard move those again and second that again without the all, with just the all and not the some?
We're going to go through that.
Oh, are we? Okay, never mind.
Try that again.
I just.
Yeah, that's what we're doing.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So, this is going to be interesting. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
I have a motion from Committee Member Wilson.
Second.
And a second from Committee Member Scheid. Any discussions? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay.
Move for a roll call vote, Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Chair, weren't we going to hear from the public? Did I miss something on the motion?
Yeah.
Discussion.
I thought
Discussion.
I thought we,
After you move, yeah.
okay.
After you
Discussion,
move,
you
they
should
get
have.
to discuss.
You can tell we're a little rusty.
Yeah, we're a little rusty.
And this is for all, is that correct?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
Our discussions.
That's
coming.
some.
Yeah, you changed it.
Comments
Are-
now.
Just ask if there's members of the public.
Okay.
Before or after discussion?
Yeah, I was going to say.
It's part of the discussion.
It's part
The
of the
discussions?
It is part of the discussion. After it's moved.
Committee and then the public.
Okay, yeah, there was a vote here, but just, why don't you go ahead? Does anyone in the public want to address the committee on that? If someone does, feel free to address, and if the committee wants to reconsider its vote, it can at that point in time. Anyone?
Is there anyone from the public that would like to discuss?
You're good. Generally, you would start with the public discussion and then allow the committee to have discussion because they have received that input.
So that would be,
What I will tell you is our format does not require public discussion on each of these from the public, but you as a committee can choose to allow it.
okay. That's what I
They
thought.
also have the opportunity to provide input after your actions. So it's up to the committee, up to the chair as to how you want to do it. But I would recommend on the next item as we go there, that if you want to have public discussion after the motion's made and it's second, I would accept the public discussion first and then the
Okay.
committee discussion.
All right.
I'll help you through, so.
Okay, hey, thanks. Roll call vote, so I'll ask you to take it. Now we take a roll call. Roll call vote.
Committeemember Renard,
Yes.
Committeemember Hinman,
Aye.
Committeemember Passion,
Yes.
Committeemember Scheid,
Yes.
Committeemember Sharp,
Aye.
Committeemember Wilson,
Yes.
Committeemember Zedek,
Nay.
Vice Chair Batter,
Yes.
Chairman Columbia.
Yes.
Passes.
Motion passes. Now we do the next.
We were having a discussion.
Right, so she can jump back in. We can jump back in.
do we
So
wanna have
what we'll
fir-
do is discuss, and then when it comes time to vote, I'll bring it to vote.
That sounds fine, Chairman. So the next piece after the CIP program was the existing rate structure. So some of the items for thought or consideration are, do we keep the existing rate structure? Do we have the multifamily as a separate class, the commercial block rates, the CAP water included or phased in, and is that a separate line item? So those are some things you've discussed and considered. We can have discussion about that. If anybody has questions or wants to clarify amongst yourselves or ask questions, or if you'd like to move to make a motion, then I will be seated.
I have a question.
Yes, Committee Member Pancrasi.
Mark?
Holmes?
Yeah, Mark Holmes. If we phase in our CAP water, are we going to lose some of our allotment that we've gotten?
If you're
You know what I'm saying? The city of Goodyear has so much allotted from the CAP for the city of Goodyear. If we phase in the payment of that, do we lose any of our allotment?
The answer to that is no.
Okay, that's all I wanted to know.
Yeah, we just order less water. We don't lose any of our allotment. One part of our contract with the federal government. The other is a lease with the Indian community.
Okay.
We do not lose any.
Got it, thank you. That's the only thing I.
Same question.
Could we do round?
Question I had.
Excuse me. Could we do roundtable on the discussion part?
Sure.
So we just make sure that everybody's heard.
Sure. Yes, Chairman. I'll start on this side this time. Committee Member, I'm trying to alternate. Committee Member Pancrasi, thoughts, consideration, where you're kind of sitting?
CAP rate should be separated out. I continue to think that.
Committee Member Zednik?
I too would like the CAP rate separated out, phased in.
Okay. And for the both of you, though, the existing rate structure or any of the other components?
I don't know enough about this multifamily, I'm sorry. To decide whether to separate it out or, naturally, you want to do what's best, so.
Did you have thoughts?
I think the majority of the folks who live in the city of Goodyear are those who have single-family houses. Those that are in multifamily houses are rated as commercial. I think that more of that needs to be discussed with the person who owns the property, who actually is being able to write off a portion of that rate, and whether or not, since they can write a portion of that off, maybe that the tenants need to get together and make sure that they're not paying a higher rate than what they should by the owner of the property. Because I think the owner of the property sets those rates for those multifamily. So at least in my experiences with mobile home parks.
Okay.
So I think that the rate structure should stay the same and I think it should be phased in.
And the cap separated out?
And the cap separated out.
Okay. Committee Member Hinman?
I don't have an opinion on the cap. I'm fine if it's separated out. I do have an opinion on the rate structure. I would like to see it altered, whether that's creating a separate multifamily class altogether or amending the commercial. I think it needs to be explored more. Quite frankly, I think there needs to be justification for the rate discrepancy, if there is one. I just don't think that there's enough information to suggest that multifamily, again, assuming that I made proper calculations, are paying significantly more for water. I respectfully disagree that the multifamily or that the owners are setting the rates. There are guidelines prescribed by statute. I would hope, I suspect, that most property owners are following the statute. And if they're sub-metered, again, that's a pass-through. That's a bill that's going directly to the resident. So I think it warrants at least further discussion and perhaps justification. So my recommendation, well, it's perhaps not completely concise, but it's either creating a separate rate structure for multifamily or further adjusting the commercial block structure.
Okay, thank you. Committee Member Sharp, thoughts?
I'm a little confused by discuss and consider action on the city's existing utility rate structure. We've been talking about two different kinds of rate structure. We were given the one that's now and the alternate.
Okay, that would be the rate plan, which is the utility rate. That's the actual utility rate, how it'll be phased in. What we're discussing now is the rate structure. So it was the one. Do you remember that where we kind of?
Okay. Yes.
Broke that.
Okay, I am definitely for the cap rate being separate.
Okay.
I agree. I would not be prepared to vote aye on the multifamily as a separate rate class. Because I don't think there's enough information. I think it's becoming like I would like to see the statutes. I would like to see the tax. I think it needs further study, so I would vote against. My vote would be a nay for that. So I think that's it.
Okay, thank you. Committee Member Wilson.
I would have no problem with the cap line being a separate line on the bill. As far as the multifamily, I've had one incident of that, and it goes back several years. And basically, a landlord at an apartment complex I had over in California was actually using that as a profit line. He was actually charging more for the water than what he was paying for it. So, he admitted it. I mean, it was an admitted thing. So he viewed that as a way of the 1 6-month period we didn't get a rent increase, we got a water increase. So I think that's strictly landlord. I have no problem with the rate structure for the multifamily as it is recommended now.
Okay, thank you. Committee Member Monarch.
I very much favor, Mr. Chairman, the separation of the cap. Very much. I feel very strongly about that so that all of us can see that. I have sympathy for Member Hinman's position, but not enough. I also want more information to be tied to the current tier system. I think there could be more tiers possibly. But all that said, I understand that I voted for the CIP. And you can't have the CIP without the funding. But I would prefer not to vote tonight on a structure. But if I have to, I have a preference for which way I'll vote. I yield the floor.
Committee Member Passion.
I would agree that the cap rate should be a separate line item on the bill. And I'm in agreement with Committee Member Menrick in regards to the tiered levels. I think that it should be spread out a little bit more. I think it's too close right now. I mean, too far gapped.
Yes, more tiers. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. Committee Member Scheid? No thoughts either way? All right.
I like it the way it is.
Okay. Committee Member Zednik?
I'd like to see the cap separated out. As far as with the multifamily homes, I'm sure that most of the landlords are very conscientious and follow the statutes, but I think there's also an opportunity for some hanky-panky, so to speak, to go on there. And because of that, I would like to see a little more information. I question that. I think that that structure itself needs to be reviewed.
Okay. Vice Chair Battern.
The existing utility rate structure has been around a while. It's had a chance to be examined, I assume. Mr. Hinman can't be the first one to bring it up. Jake, if you'd allow me to ask you a question directly, have you felt like you've had an opportunity to talk with the city and try to come to some resolution?
Mr. Chair, I have presented this to staff in the past, yes.
Okay. Then I would tend to agree that the CAP separation on the line item bill is a very good thing to have. And in full, I'd tend to approve overall that the discussion of the rate structure, multifamily rate case, commercial rates instead of tiers, the CAP water rate, and the separation of the CAP on the line item.
Chairman Columbia.
Okay, I'm going to go down the line. Multifamily is a separate rate class. I believe that's, I agree with alternate member, Pacrazzi, that the person who owns that property, I think that's something we need to take up with them. I believe there are some hanky-panky going on, and I'm not sure that can be handled here. So I would go no to that. Commercial rates as blocked instead of tiers, I'd say stay the same. Cap water rate, yes. And cap rate separate line item on bill, I'd say yes to that as well.
Okay. Do we have enough information to synthesize that and so you can champion a vote? Okay.
Okay. We're going to go one.
Mr. Chairman, if I could make a suggestion from what I've heard, that you might first entertain just a motion on the CAP water rate, which seemed very strong consensus that everyone was going in the same direction. And that was the only one I heard strong direction to make a change on, so that's where I would. After you have that discussion, I'll make a suggestion to you to consider on the other issue where some asked for more information.
Okay, we'll start that way. Okay, so.
Mr. Chairman, could I suggest that we also put in, have a vote for more tiering on the residential? Because I did hear several people say that they'd like to see more tiers. So if we could have a vote on that, and then, individual versus the broad D.
Well, we'll go with Barbara.
Well, I have one more comment. Liberty Utilities, which is our other water company, they do separate out the multiple unit. So they do separate that rate out. I'm just saying if, one, we could follow what the other water company does and do the same. That's just food for thought. They do separate out the multiple units. It's a different class.
Okay.
So, the mayor talked about, she used the word balance in our initial meeting, the installation meeting. It was during Mark Holmes's presentation. She asked if there was a member from Litchfield or Liberty Waters Utility on this committee, and of course there isn't, but she asked for balance. So I think along that line we should consider the multiple unit separate as Liberty Utilities does.
It'll be put to vote. Alternate Pacrazzi?
I don't know that we're ready for a vote for the
multiple unit.
For the multiple unit yet, or the tiers. I think we need more information on both of those. If we're going to tier it out, I think we need more information before we vote. And I'd like to see what it looked like if it's tiered out a little more. And for the multifamily separation, I'd like to see what that looks like as well before I vote on it. One way.
That's what Larry was mentioning earlier as well.
Vote, right. What a cap looks like.
Right, a cap. So we're going to go to the cap, and then we'll take it from there. So.
I think for both the CAP water rate as presented tonight and the CAP rate separate line item on the bill, you can do that in one motion. It seemed like that there was consensus on that amongst the group. So it's those two I would think you'd be comfortable with one motion.
phased in or alternate two or the original?
Alternate two
Yes.
is what the first one is, and then the
Alternate
second one is that it's shown as a separate line item on the bill when it goes to the customer. So that's what those two mean in my perspective. If there's confusion, do them as separate votes. But what I heard tonight from you seemed to be support in both of those.
For lack of a better word, we're talking about D number 3 and number 4.
Right,
Yeah, okay.
with the one on number 3 being phased in as opposed to as presented on 512.
Or
So
alt two.
It's the alternate.
Alt two.
Alt two.
Alt two, if you want to do alternate two,
Alt
that works.
two.
You
Alt
saw
two.
that tonight.
Yeah, I like alt two better. Phase in is facetious.
Alternate 2.
Yeah.
What's it mean?
Phased, yes.
As presented as alternate 2.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, phased in is alt, yes. As presented is alt two.
Okay, so we're on item 6.6. I first want to go over that. Discuss and consider action on the city's existing utility rate structure. So we're bringing a motion, cap water rate as presented, alt 2, alternative 2. Okay?
I so move.
I haven't heard a motion yet.
Oh, I thought that was the motion.
No, he was,
I was about
he
to
was
say
calling for a motion.
Can I have a motion and a second to approve?
I so move.
From whom, what's the motion? Point of order?
Motion is for cap water rate as presented, alternate 2. Okay?
Yeah, point of order.
Yes?
Would the person making the motion rewrite that motion? Seems cumbersome to this member.
So,
I don't know what you mean by cumbersome.
I didn't understand. It wasn't clearly understood in my mind.
Okay, tonight we were presented with the alternate 2.
Just the motion, ma'am.
Oh, okay. Cap water rate. I move that we accept the cap water rate, alternate 2.
that's what
That's
was on the
it.
floor.
That's on the floor. Phased in.
As presented.
Alternate 2 as presented.
Okay, I have a motion from committee member Sharp and a second from committee member Scheid. Item is open for discussion from anyone from the public. All those in favor say aye.
Point of order.
Or, excuse me.
I don't think we have a second, Mr. Chairman, or I'm unaware
I had
of
a
one.
second from committee member Scheid.
My apologies, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Can we discuss that? Discussion
Okay.
of the motion by the committee,
Okay, any discussions?
yes. Could we
Alternate?
could your motion have something in there about phased in?
So you don't like the word as presented?
Point of order. Again, Mr. Chairman, is she amending the motion?
No, I'm just discussing whether or not that would help you with your
Just
clarification.
a point of order was just asking. Yeah.
Point of order. I was just discussing whether or not that would help with people's understanding. If we added the words phased in instead of as presented, or as presented, alternate to phased in. I don't know. I'm just asking for that. If anybody else has
Any other discussions?
Mr. Chairman, I understand the motion simply to be whether the cap is going to be a separate item on the bill. That's it.
No, that's another.
Hey, I
another.
was confused, Member Sharp. I knew I was confused by your motion. Would you please, Member Sharp, with the chair's permission, explain to me the motion?
Right now, I'm just making
Right.
a motion on alternate 2,
Mm-hmm.
the phased in for the cap.
The phase-in for the cap. So your motion is a phase-in for the cap, just not a separate item.
Well, that's what alternate 2 is.
Yeah, that's what I understand. Okay.
we're adopting the alternate two cap
Yes.
rate.
Yes. And then later we'll vote on whether it's a separate line or bill.
Yes,
Right.
we'll have two votes, yes.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask the mover of the motion for a friendly amendment? Instead of the number, would you be inclined to put the words into the motion? 6-2 being replaced by the actual action?
Oh,
Would you be amenable
the
to
original
that?
6-2?
6, whatever the number was, just, yeah.
Do you wanna read that again?
Instead say phase in.
What is the original 6-2 that you read prior to this? Was it 6-2?
Well, 6-5. I just want, instead of the
5-12.
number, the phase, say the word phase in. Would you be amenable to that? Is a friendly amendment?
If I could make a suggestion, it's very clear if you look on page 15, item 2,
Page
cap
15.
water allocation, it shows the phased-in amounts as proposed. And I think that's what the motion was intended to encompass.
Is it page 15?
Page 15,
Right.
item 2, cap water allocations, and it shows the amount by year.
Right. Okay.
And that's what the
Okay.
motion was intended to contemplate.
All right, I am going to make an amendment, and that will include the phased in after the alt 2. So, the cap water rate, alternate 2, as presented on, what date? Are we May 19th, 2015. Alternate 2 phased in.
Got it. Let me try this. What she's amending is, it's going to say cap water rate, alternate 2 as phased in.
I'll second that.
May 19th.
May
I
19th.
May
have the
19th.
date. You have the page.
Okay, so can I have a motion and a second to amend?
I must so move.
I have a motion from Committee Member Sharp
In a second.
and a second from Committee Member Passion. Okay, roll call vote?
Committee Member Zednik?
Yes.
Committee Member Wilson?
Aye.
Committee Member Sharp?
Aye.
Committee Member Schein?
Aye.
Committee Member Passion?
Yes.
Committee Member Hinman?
Aye.
Committee Member Menard?
Yes.
Vice Chair Battern?
Aye.
Chairman Columbia?
Yes. Motion passes. All right, so the next item is cap rate separate line item on bill. I'll rephrase that, adopt a cap rate on a separate line item on the bill. Okay? Can I have a motion and a second?
A motion.
I have a motion from Vice Chair Badner
Second.
and a second from Committee Member Passion. Open for discussion from the public? Can I get a roll call vote?
Discussion, please,
Sorry,
Mr. Chairman?
sorry. I'm jumping ahead. Discussions? Peter?
Mr. Chairman, point of inquiry to the maker of the motion. Would you just please speak to the motion and inform this member as to what you understand the motion to mean?
My motion was put forward to clarify the agreement with separating the CAP rate on the water bill so that it reflects. That's where that is going to.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Any more discussions? Okay, roll call vote.
Committee Member Nard?
Yes.
Committee Member Hinman? Committee Member Passion?
Yes.
Committee Member Scheid?
Yes.
Committee Member Sharp?
Aye.
Committee Member Wilson?
Aye.
Committee Member Zednik?
Yes.
Vice Chair Banner?
Aye.
Chairman Columbia?
Yes. Motion passes.
Mr. Chairman, if I could make a suggestion
You could.
for the group as it relates to the commercial rates, the multifamily rates, the block rates. We heard several comments tonight of differing views from the committee, but I also heard several times that more information was needed on this subject. We need to, of course, move forward with the rates at this point in time, but I think there was enough question that I heard that should direct us to move towards a further review on this subject. When Jake came in to visit with me about it, at that point in time, I knew we were going into the rate study, and I asked him to actually participate in this process as a means of looking at it. So we really didn't address it at that point in time. I just, bluntly, we didn't have the chance to at that point. And so I do think it's appropriate and could be included in your report, which goes to the City Council as a recommendation, if the committee is inclined to direct that, as a recommendation that staff working with the rate consultant or whoever else we consider necessary review those options and report back to the City Council as to what those options are and how they change.
Mr. Chair, if you need a motion, I would attempt to make one.
Hold on one second, please. Excuse me, Larry?
Yes.
Is this just to have staff take this offline to review the multifamily and commercial rates?
But the timing of it, just for clarification, because my colleague asked me the same question. We cannot move forward with a reasonable schedule, getting this to the City Council and making adjustments at this point in time. So what I'm requesting is, as this moves forward, that we take the time to study it. It's going to take longer than the adoption of the first rates, but that if it's included in your recommendation, that we will do that analysis. We will work with the Multifamily Association, but also, quite frankly, with the rate consultant to run the calculations. To ask them to run the calculations in time that we can make an informed recommendation to the City Council is not practical.
It sounds, so my question is this, are you asking to bring this to a vote? Are you asking to pan this discussion?
I am suggesting that there be a vote on it because I would like to know if that is the committee's desire.
Okay. So bring both line items to vote. 1 second, please. So bring both line items to vote.
No, I'm sorry.
what
What
I
I'm
thought.
asking,
Yes.
okay, what I'm asking is that the committee provide a recommendation to the City Council that would direct staff to work with the rate consultant and other appropriate sources of information to analyze the impact of the residential rates versus commercial and multifamily rates. Some of the information that I heard several people mention today, they didn't have enough information. to study that impact and over that first year of the proposed rate increase or sooner if possible, bring information back to the city council.
With all due respect, I thought, and I could be wrong, that part of this utility rate study, part of the revenues that this is going to create is going to be coming from, or will be coming from, multifamily as well as the commercial.
It will.
So putting that's why I keep asking the question, should we bring this to vote? I mean, we're talking about slowing this
This would
process.
not, no. As a matter of fact, I'm trying to accomplish the opposite.
Okay.
The effect of this that I'm trying to accomplish is that the rate structure, as it relates to commercial and multifamily, as I'm suggesting, would not change today. And the recommendation wouldn't change, but the direction would be to get that additional information that many of you asked about in there, because I think with what I heard tonight, it'd be hard for me, if I were any one of you, to make a solid recommendation of changing, bluntly. And that's what I'm recommending.
Alternate Pekrossi?
If we make a motion for that, I'd like to have something in there that says the residential rates don't go up from the Alt 2 plan to accommodate multi-housing. Does that make sense?
That does make sense.
So that you can have a separate line item for multi-housing, but the residential rates aren't going to rise for that purpose.
Given, again, we went back to what Dan presented, that the way I understood this was this is a combination of all revenues in this plan. Now, if we pull out, again, I keep hearing it sounds like we postpone or pull out.
No. Go ahead. I think.
Go ahead, Committee Member Wilson.
What I think the idea is that we go ahead and approve like the Tier 2 rate structure or the Tier 1, including the multifunction family rate structure as recommended, with the caveat that additional information would be given to the City Council as to the impact of additional tiers and or changes to the multifamily.
That additional information, just for clarification, would not come immediately. It would come over the next.
Committee Member Manerick?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to submit a motion. I move that the committee direct city staff to analyze and examine multifamily and commercial rate structures and report to the City Council in a manner that does not change committee recommendations on rate structures.
Second.
Motion's on the floor.
Discussion.
Okay, I heard I had a motion from Committee Member Manerick, but I heard a second from Wilson.
Yes.
Committee Member Wilson.
Mm-hmm.
Any discussions from the public?
Yes, I have a comment. That sounds like it's rushing things through even faster than the city manager even recommended. And I don't agree with that. Unless you want to restate your motion. You're saying that you vote on everything as is.
Please.
Member Sharp, I'm not sure I understand your question, but I'm
Please restate your motion.
Pardon?
Please restate your motion.
I'd be happy to.
Thank you.
We can't make motions that get into each other's heads. I move the committee direct city staff to analyze and examine multifamily and commercial rate structures and report on such to the City Council in a manner that does not change committee recommendations on residential rate structure.
Well, from what I have heard is that that alternate Pencrosi said that she didn't want the residential in Alt 2 raised. But I'm wondering if there can't be more of a tiering in the residential rate. Does one negate the other? Couldn't you tier the residential rate to come out with the same cost, but maybe more in favor of the resident?
Committee Member Manerick?
Mr. Chairman, the motion was made with the purpose and the intent that if the committee made a recommendation on residential rate structures and rates, that the city council staff or the staff would recognize and adhere to our committee recommendation in making their analysis and their report to city council.
And residential was included in that.
That, Member Sharp, is the reason for the last clause. Does not change committee recommendations on residential rate structures or rates. That, if the language is ambiguous, it's open to amendment by you, but that was my intent when I made the motion.
Is it ambiguous to you?
Alternate Percalzi? Alternate Percalzi?
There was two things that we were discussing. One was separating out multi-housing from commercial. That was one. Two was tiering, looking at a larger tiering of residential. Now, does your motion do that, or do we need to amend your motion and make it more specific so that it actually says those words?
Committee Member Manerick?
Mr. Chairman, I believe my amendment addresses both those concerns because
Okay.
I believe it allows the committee, if it so chooses, to examine tier structures for residentials, which gets to the last clause. And to the other point that the member makes, I specifically included in the motion and conjoined with the conjunction and multifamily and commercial, thinking that if something goes up, the other must go down, or if something goes down, the other up. So that was purposely joined. Mr. Chairman, I yield the floor.
Any more discussions?
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry.
1 second,
to
please.
belabor this.
Committee Member Hinman, I did see Committee Member Pancrazzi had her hand up. If I could,
Go ahead. No, you're.
because he just jumped right in there. Go.
Oh, okay.
That's okay. She's in the corner there.
Do any of the other members want it to be more specific other than me? I want it to be more specific so that we're directing staff to look at tiering residential more than it is right now, and that we're looking at separating commercial and multi-housing and making it 2 line items. Now, I know that that's our recommendation, but should our motion be, I like everything to be real spelled out.
Alternate Pancrazzi, can I have Committee Member Manerick repeat his motion just to make sure?
Okay.
Just to make sure.
Free to amend it, ma'am.
Huh?
Yeah,
I can't
it's open to
amend
it.
I'm an
Oh.
alternate.
She's an alternate.
Maybe somebody will.
That's why I'm asking.
We'll get to you, Jake.
Got it. Well played. Okay. Well played. Well played. My motion. I move the committee direct city staff to analyze and examine multifamily and commercial rate structures and report to the city council in a manner that does not change committee recommendations on residential rates or rate structures.
Committee Member Hinman.
Mr. Chair, I would actually ask for perhaps a friendly amendment to have staff not only examine the separate rate structure for multifamily and commercial, but also go so far as to say also to examine the cost of service for multifamily and commercial customers compared to single-family customers. And to explain my rationale is I think that gets to the root of perhaps some of this argument as to why we believe we're essentially being given an unfair rate. So, is that?
Point of order, Mr. Chairman. I consider that a friendly amendment.
And that's what I suggested.
1 second, please.
So I'd be ready, Mr. Chairman, to reread my motion
Yes.
with the friendly amendment.
1 second, please. Committee Member Manerick, please read.
As I understand the friendly amendment, move the committee direct city staff to analyze and examine multifamily and commercial rate structures and costs of service, and report to the city council in a manner that does not change committee recommendations on residential rates or rate structures. Did I capture it?
Okay, can I have a motion, a second, to approve the amended?
Point of order, sir. If I considered it a friendly amendment, sir, under Robert's rules, it should not need an amendment to this because I made the motion and did not think that my motion was changed.
Okay.
Are we still discussing that?
Yes, we are.
Okay, so the first part of the motion, I would like I would like to include in the very first sentences the residential tiering. So we've got the commercial, we've got the multi, and we've got residential tiering in there. Not just the commercial and the multi.
With all due respect,
In other words, we're considering all phases of tiering.
Point of order. I do not consider this a friendly amendment, so I'd ask that she'd make the motion to amend my motion.
Are you amending the motion?
I'm amending it, and he says it's not friendly, so he wants a new motion.
Yeah, you're amending my motion.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. That's fine.
Okay.
Separate. So do we go for vote on?
I would suggest separating that to get the motion on the table because I don't think you have the same consensus. So I would suggest, unless there's a second to an amendment to that effect, I really would suggest you move forward with the motion at hand. And then if there's another motion on the tiered rate structure, which could be discussed separately, and I think that was the point made earlier.
So you're saying bring hers to motion for a second?
No, the motion at
Chair,
hand is the motion that you've
motion's
already
on,
received.
it's on the table.
With the friendly amendment that previously that was included.
So we vote? Okay.
Yes. That'd be my suggestion to the committee.
Committee member Manerick, could you please read your motion again?
I move the committee direct city staff to analyze and examine multifamily and commercial rate structures and costs of service and report to the city council in a manner that does not change committee recommendations on residential rates or rate structures.
Roll call vote.
Yes.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
Aye.
Yes. Motion carries. Committee member Sharp. Committee member Sharp, can you state your? Yeah, you want a motion on the tiers?
Okay, yes. Okay. I move, we've already voted on the commercial and the multifamily. So now my motion would just include residential, further residential tiering. But I move that we have the city council and the staff look at multi-tiering the residential. Need a motion.
Hold on, we're trying to analyze this.
Oh.
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing is staff analyzes consultants and report to the council the impacts of further residential tiering. That sound adequate?
Can I get a motion for staff to analyze with consultants and report to the council the impacts of further residential tiering?
I so move.
Do I have a second? Second? Motion fails. Okay. Now I think we move on to B. Yeah, you can, Teresa?
So the next piece was the talking about the recommendations for future water needs, and in particular was that line oversizing. I think that was the only thing, unless anyone remembers anything else under that topic. And that was, installing larger lines to kind of prepare for the future. I don't know if we want to have just a motion. I don't know if we want to just have a discussion on that or incorporate it into the alternate.
This evening, we presented, or the consultants presented an alternative that phases that in over 5 years. And so I think the issue before the committee is, do you support that? And whether it's a discussion that you need to go around or just a motion and a second to include the line oversizing and impact fee reimbursement phased in as presented and part of alternative 2.
I do know we're, time is, it's getting late, but I also know that we've been following this pattern where we do a discussion, then we bring the motion. So really like to
discuss after a motion
right.
is what I'm suggesting.
You're saying discuss after a motion.
If we,
if there's consensus. Yeah.
So if they just decide or have agreement on alternative 2, isn't that inherently including that? It does. So if you wish to adopt alternative 2, because it sounds like I've heard that a couple times, that would inherently adopt the line oversizing. So did we want to go around the room?
Still have to, what, Vice Chair Bader?
I would like a point of clarification, phased in or otherwise. That kind of leaves the door open, right?
So what the suggestion I'm making is you take out the or otherwise.
Yes,
when this was presented to you, what the idea was, you have a choice. We had the original plan that we showed a week ago. Okay.
Alt 2, we're talking about, no
Alt
problem.
2 is
I agree, it's a phased
phased
in over time.
Yes.
The only thing that worried me was the otherwise, why that's even in there.
Okay.
If it's phased in, it's phased in, right?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Okay.
So did we, Bob?
One benefit in mentioning complete acceptance of alternate 2, there'd be no question as far as all elements of phase alternate 2 are acceptable to the committee.
Okay, thanks for the clarification.
I'm going to wait for the chairman. I apologize, committee member Sednick, just to make sure that.
Okay, right now we're on bear with me, we're on 6.8, discuss and consider action for recommendations for future water needs to support growth and development. Can I have a motion and a second to discuss and consider action on recommendations for future, sorry, 1 second. Change on the fly. Okay, can I have a motion and a second to recommend for future water needs to support growth and development, including the line oversizing and impact fees funding as presented in the alternate 2 on 5/19/2015.
So moved.
I have a motion from Committee Member Wilson
Second.
and a second from Committee Member Sharp. Item is open for discussion from anyone from the public. Chased them all. Then the committee. Item is open for discussion from the committee. Committee Member Manerick.
Question to the maker of the motion. So you understand this motion means that the recommendation about the line oversizing, that's
Will be phased in as opposed to upfront.
Right. Thank you. I yield the floor.
Committee Member Zenick, you've been very quiet.
Just a quiet guy. I just want to make sure that we're only voting on the line oversizing. Is that correct? Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think you,
Sorry. Any more comments?
Is in answer to that, just a little bit expanded on page 15 again. It's shown tonight, alternate to line 5. It's unfunded impact fees and oversizing, but it's still phased in over the 5 years.
Correct. Okay. But I mean,
But it's just that line.
that line item.
Yes.
Yeah, because there seemed to be some discussion. Well, we'll just vote for alternate 2, and everything gets whitewashed with it. But we're only voting on that one line item. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Roll call vote.
Committee Member Zednick,
Yes.
Committee Member Wilson,
Yes.
Committee Member Sharp,
Aye.
Committee Member Scheid,
Yes.
Committee Member Passion,
Yes.
Committee Member Hinman,
Aye.
Committee Member Menard,
Yes.
Vice Chair Batten,
Aye.
Chairman Columbia.
Yes. Motion carries. Line item E, our next line item.
The very first item, if I could present, this is the one that in Bob's comments, the very first item under here, Bob referred to earlier when we started the meeting, reduce operating expenses to reconcile with the adopted fiscal year budget. When the consultant started this rate study, we were actually starting with fiscal year 14 data, adjusting it for fiscal year 15 and moving forward. When we updated, getting ready for the committee, we updated to 15 data, moving forward to 16. Last night, the City Council adopted the fiscal year 16 budget. The operating increase included in the fiscal year 16 budget was not as high as projected in these charts. So what I'm bringing to your attention this evening is that just by direction here, we can work, we as a staff can work with the consultant to reduce the operating expenditures, and the word reduce is up there, to match the adopted fiscal year 16 budget, so that that would lower the expenses included in there, which would result in lowering the rates from what you have already seen. Probably end up, I mean, it's not a huge lowering, but I just would rather do that reconciliation and keep it clean and straightforward.
Larry, is that what this handout was given to us about? It's kind of showing the adoptions of the supplementals and what was line itemed out and what was kept?
Those supplementals, that was something you asked for last week. That's additional information that is a specific line item on here. No, this is actually going up into the top lines on the chart, like on page 15.
Okay.
We're going up to the total initial budget number, and we'll reduce that down to match what the City Council adopted. But it is adopted. It's not an estimate or anything else.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
so are you saying that needs to be included in any type of motion?
If the
Reducing
committee would
them?
like to follow that, they could make a motion to do that, which would have the effect of lowering the rates a little bit.
Okay, so this discussion then, I know Committee Member Zednick's smiling at that.
I like the term a little bit. How would you like to hang just a little bit off the ground?
So this discussion is really a recommendation for the rate plan. So this was the alternate one that we saw where it was kind of bigger at the front, and then alternate 2 where it was kind of phased in, and then discussing this reducing the operating expenses.
So are you saying to strike the word reconcile and use the word reduce?
No, the first word up there says reduce. So it's reduce operating expenses to reconcile with the adopted budget. So the intent is that the operating expenses that you saw on pages 14 and 15, I believe it is, that we would compare those two to the budget and we would drop them as appropriate and have the consultant change the rates, but it cannot increase the rates, it can only lower from what you've seen.
That's only for 2016, right?
Yes. Some of it will actually carry forward to the other years.
Yeah, we'll flow through to the other years.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, it's clear what it's saying right there, so, one moment, please. Okay, so here we are. We're discussing and considering action on recommendations for the draft utility rates to support operations, maintenance, capital improvements, debt service, and future water resource needs. Okay. Can I have a motion and a second to approve reducing operating expenses to reconcile with the adopted fiscal year 2016 budget?
I saw a motion.
I have a motion from Committee Member Scheid.
Second.
And a second from Committee Member Wilson. Item is open for discussion from anyone from the public. Then the committee.
Point of order.
Yes?
Would the chair please read the motion?
I will read the motion. The motion is to reduce the operating expenses to reconcile with the adopted fiscal year 2016 budget. Any comments?
The operating expenses have already been reduced, right?
Hey.
Is that what you said for the budget?
So
the motion says we're going to reduce the operating, but they've already been reduced.
Okay, this presentation shows higher expenses than what the adopted budget. So what the motion would do would reduce these down to the adopted budget, which would lower the amount of the rate that would be needed.
So you're reducing the operating expenses here because
Correct,
they've already, okay.
to match up to the
I
budget
guess-
that we adopted.
Match up to the
Okay,
city
I
council
Year
adopted last
2016
night.
budget. Okay.
So it would, it would lower the increase, the percentage.
Any more discussions? Committee Member Zedek?
Yeah, I'm stumbling with the word a little bit, Mr. Lang.
I didn't use that word a little bit. But
No,
that was
you
thrown out
you
there.
didn't. That was tossed out. Can we clarify that or put some definition around that a little bit, like 1%, 10%, 100%?
Well, I ran a calculation today, but keep in mind we adopted the budget last night, and I had my budget staff look at this today. And so this is a little bit closer to cocktail napkin, but the impact that we thought on that, that I came up in there would be in the 2.5% to 3% range.
Lower.
Lower.
I'd like to see that included in the motion.
Well, the problem with that is we haven't run that calculation other than me doing it with a calculator. But we thought that you would want it at the lower amount.
Well, we do want the lower amount, and we appreciate that. I'm sorry, sir.
No, it's okay.
And we appreciate you bringing that to light. It's just that a little bit and a lower amount, all those terms just don't work real well with me. I would kind of like to have a little more definitive answer, that's all.
Okay. We can have the consultant rerun the rates, and you can see the exact amount in another meeting. It would take a week or two to get that back to you. The concept here is, and one thing that Dan has said in his previous presentations is that when you get to the point of calculating the rates, it's a mathematical function. So what you're doing is you're taking one of the inputs in that formula and you're lowering it. You're lowering a cost. The mathematical function of it creates a lower rate. My estimate was done with a calculator just real quick, but if my estimate was inaccurate and it's only 1%, then would we drop the rates to 2.5% and not have rates adequate to cover our costs? That would be where you would be left. Likewise, if instead of 2.5% it was 5%, I'd rather we get the accurate amount based on the costs.
Committee Member Manerick?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I understand that the motion includes the word reconcile,
Yes.
which makes me happy because that means it's more precise. That's why I'm in favor generally of the motion, because that's not a little bit. That means reconcile. So I think that's a very precise term. Secondly, point of order, possibly followed by a friendly amendment with
Yes.
permission of the chair. So point of order, could you read the motion again, please?
Yes. Reduce operating expenses to reconcile.
Mr. Chairman, that's, yes. Now, friendly amendment, I think I would like to make a friendly amendment that we amend the motion that the committee recommends to the city council, or is the committee's position, or something to that effect. Seems to me like we are dictating to city council with the current motion. And I'm open to the maker of the motion to adjust the language to accept that friendly amendment.
Motion came from Committee Member Scheid. Did you, can you restate your position there?
I'd be willing to agree to where instead we say reduce operating expenses, the committee would recommend to City Council that they reduce the operating expenses to reconcile with the adopted fiscal 16 budget.
The committee would recommend.
Committee would recommend to City Council that they reduce the operating expenses to reconcile with the adopted fiscal 16 budget. Does that sound correct, Peter?
Thank you very much. I'm very happy with that.
Yeah, let me reread the motion, make sure I've got this clear. The committee would recommend to the City Council to reduce operating expenses to reconcile with the adopted fiscal year 2016 budget.
That's correct. Point of order.
Yes?
Did the maker of the motion want the subjective tense would instead of the present tense? The tense will may. Would is subjective. I know it's a quibble, but it's a big quibble.
I'll leave it there. Would.
Done.
Done. Any more discussions? Okay, roll call vote.
Committee Member Sharp?
Aye.
Committee Member Wilson?
Aye.
Committee Member Zednick?
Hey.
Committee Member Scheid?
Aye.
Committee Member Passion?
Aye.
Committee Member Hibbins? Committee Member Bernard?
Yes.
Vice Chair Batter?
Aye.
Chairman Columbia?
Yes. Motion passes.
Mr. Chairman, if I could maybe make a recommendation. 'Cause
You could, please.
This is where it gets the most difficult for the committee. We have discussed tonight a number of variables that the committee has made recommendations and motions on. With that, we would have the consultant rerun the report to calculate out what those rates look like exactly. What I am suggesting for the committee, you have two options. One that avoids an additional meeting, and then another one that has an additional meeting. We can have the consultant do that, at which time you would see the rates, touch them, and so forth, and then vote to recommend them. Or the committee would have the option of recommending the rate plan as a result of the other recommendations the committee has made, and then include as part of that a motion to direct us to provide the committee with a copy of it prior to it being sent to the City Council so that you can see what it looked like and ask questions if any arise.
Can you please repeat that?
Okay, I think there's
There's
two
a lot
options
in that sentence.
Yeah, there's two options that I think the committee can consider. One option is that do nothing tonight on recommending a 5-year rate plan, wait for the consultant to recalculate the rates based upon that and get together a week from now or something to that effect. The second option is that the committee has given direction on numerous items this evening that would change this plan, and just direct us to have the consultant adjust the rates based on all of the committee actions this evening, and to just send you electronically a copy of the charts as amended, but that tonight the committee approve it based on the other actions the committee has taken.
So, in other words, we would approve either Tier 1 or Tier 2.
Alternate 2 only.
Alternate 1 or alternate 2, with the caveat that adjustments would be recommended based upon the recalculation.
The adjustments have already been recommended by the committee as we've discussed them. Based on those adjustments, there would be a recalculation of the rates, but only based upon the adjustments made by the committee, not any other adjustments.
Yeah.
Can I just mention something real quickly? The alternate 2 rate plan that you saw tonight, based on what you all have discussed tonight, and the reconciliation that you all adopted, the new alternative rate plan will probably be a couple of dollars less each year. Won't be more than a couple of dollars, it'll just be a little bit. So the issue you have to face is, do you want to see the plan before you vote on it, or do you want to vote on the concept of alternative 2, understanding that the final alternative 2 will be a little less than what you saw tonight? So the question is, do you want to meet again, or do you want to adopt the plan, understanding that it's going to be a little bit less, or do you actually want to see it before you vote on it? If you want to see it before you vote on it, then we have to get together again, because we got to recalc the numbers.
Well, I have a question based on the reconciliation. Are we talking, based on what you're saying there, is there any chance that the rates that you've already calculated when you recalculate them are going to go up?
No chance at all, because the budget that was just voted on last night by the council came in lower than what was projected as part of this rate plan.
So your
Which is
5-year
good
projection
news.
now.
I mean, so the council actually did part of your work for you by actually cutting some of the budget increase.
So basically, when you recalculate and restructure, say alternative 2 that we're talking and discussing tonight, we'll see different percentage increases slightly different adjustments. So what your concern would be then we wouldn't be collecting enough revenue throughout the project because the rates would be lower.
No, you'll collect enough revenue.
Yeah.
Okay.
I assure you of that.
So there'd be no chance that we're actually, instead of seeing $81.99, it wouldn't be $85.99. It would maybe be $80.99 or something slightly
Exactly.
less.
It might be $80.50 instead of $81.99. But I promise you, it won't be higher than $81.99.
Okay. Thank you.
Should I reword that? Can I have a motion and a second to adopt alternate 2 as presented on 5/19/2015 with adjustments recommended by the Water Planning Committee?
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion from Committee Member Scheid and a second from Committee Member Wilson. Items open for discussion. Anyone from the public? Anyone from the committee? Discussions? Committee Member Zedek?
Yeah, I'm from Missouri. Show me. I'd like to see it before I vote on it.
Before you vote? Is that a motion?
You already have a motion.
Oh, that's discussion.
That's discussion. From Missouri.
Yeah, oh.
Any other discussions? Excuse me. Where's your hand? Committee Member Monerick?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like the maker of the motion to speak in favor of the motion to help me in my vote.
I knew I shouldn't say anything.
Just tell me, say yes.
Yes.
No, help me. Why are you in? I know you're.
Oh, okay.
Why are you in favor of this?
The reason why I'm in favor of it is I think we saw I had in mind what I thought would be a much more palatable as any time rate increase can even be. Instead of a 25% or a 27%, One thing that I saw that I liked was they've spread out the costs. They're slightly increased in those years 4 and 5, but we're not hit in the front end. And because I think with the new reconciled budget, the levels are down a little bit, I'm comfortable with the idea of seeing the more modest increases. I think the way staff is going to work, I think the way the railroad works out there with operations, why it's going to take X amount of time to do these designs and get these capital budgets and the time frame it takes for cities to do this, I think these rates are palatable. As best they can be. I mean, I live here just like everybody else. I'm not happy with having rate increases like this, but I think in the long run, this is more in meaning with what we were hoping to do, and I think this is more in meaning with what council and what staff needs.
Thank you.
Any more discussions?
Sir.
Committee Member Zedek?
Voting to approve alternate 2, whether it's viable or not is certainly what we're all here to determine. And I agree that the alternate 2 is a much more palatable example of the rate increase. The only problem was that we never approached C, and I think that's vital to the whole rate increase. I think that we should be looking at this whole package, even though we're inevitably there's going to be a rate increase. What are we going to get for it? I know we're going to get the water and all this other stuff and pipes and all that hoo-ha.
Would you like Teresa Manerick to speak to that? On item number C?
Sure.
Threw that out at there.
You launched that one, didn't you?
Yeah.
So the
coffee.
The next piece was going to be, after we get finished completing that vote, we were going to discuss some of those items that were not necessarily directly impacting currently the utility rates, and then how those can be addressed for future discussions. So that was on that final column.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so we were going to see what we could do, how we can include that in the recommendations of this committee, so that they continue to have life and to get motion on them.
But what would happen if, for example, water conservation initiatives, hot water heaters, the council said, "Yep, we're going to do away with those. We're going to those little suitcase type size heaters." There's not going to be any grass in the front yard. Pools we're going to hit Pete up for his pool.
Committee Member Zedek, I think what she was mentioning is this is coming up next. This is going to be our next discussion.
But those all
But
impact.
if we could, if I could answer the question, I think directly that he's asking, none of those items, if they were adopted by the city council, would adjust the rates today. They would adjust them in the future. They would have impact, or should I say, they could impact rates in the future, but they will not change the rate structures today, because you've got to cover your costs for your operations today. These are, they're very relevant to have as part of the discussion. That's why they're up there. But they don't change the math of the proposed rate increase at all.
Yeah.
That would make sense.
Yeah.
These would be proposed on the plan going forward with the committee, correct?
Subject to the committee
Right.
agreeing to them, of course.
Okay.
Any other discussions? Can I get a roll call vote?
Committeemember Hinman?
No.
Committeemember Bernard?
Yes.
Committeemember Passion?
Yes.
Committeemember Schein?
Yes.
Committeemember Sharp?
Nay.
Committeemember Wilson?
Aye.
Committeemember Zedek?
Nay.
Vice Chair Batter?
Aye.
Chairman Columbia?
Yes. Motion carries.
On the last one, it is our suggestion as a staff, we kind of anticipated this, which is why we pushed this presentation off.
Point of
There
order,
are
Mr.
some.
Yes?
I'm going to request to the chair to deal with the last item in the column, so you know. I have a motion that I would like to make that might expedite matters. The chair is willing to hear the motion and discuss it, but if it doesn't get a second, it wouldn't go anywhere, but it might move things forward. That's the point of order, but I have a motion that would affect the agenda items 6.4B, 6.4C, 6.8, and 6.9. And if the chair would allow, I would like to make that motion.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And before I make the motion, I'm willing to understand that there may be amendments to this motion, but here's my motion. Whereas the committee had a duty to make recommendations on water resources for growth and development, and whereas the committee was unable to credibly perform this duty, the committee will recommend in its report to City Council that it engage in study and analysis on water resources for growth and development. So moved.
Was that for all or just 6.4?
It's all of it.
All of it.
I don't, yeah. I don't think we've talked to these
6.4?
That's what we had him read off.
Right, but I have been reading them off.
Yeah, 6.4, 6.8, 6.9.
That's not part of the motion. It was just, I'm speaking to the agenda items about growth and development.
Mm-hmm.
Water resources for growth and development. That's all this motion is attempting to do.
Which is column C.
And
Oh, I gotcha.
Yeah, what I was trying to address previous, but go ahead with that, was the last item in column E there.
understand your point, sir. Yeah. If you would like me to read the motion, sir?
I'm going to bring it to motion.
I made the motion, sir.
Okay.
And you gave me the floor to make it. But it didn't get a second yet.
Can you please reread that?
I will, this
Okay,
time
thank you.
slowly. Whereas the committee had a duty to make recommendations on water resources for growth and development, and whereas the committee was unable to credibly perform this duty, the committee will recommend in its report to City Council that it engage in study and analysis on water resources for growth and development.
Can I have a second? Motion fails. Excuse me, hold on.
Would you clarify that for me a little bit, Pete, please?
Yes.
If the chair allows, can't speak to the
Please.
motion if it doesn't have a second.
Committee Member Manerick, can you please reread it?
Well, it's not reread.
Don't-
I thought he
don't-
wanted to.
yeah.
Here's what I'm
You want to
talking about.
discuss? Okay,
Yeah.
go ahead.
There's a lot of items that I wanted to talk about water resources and growth. I'm not prepared to speak to them because we never had the time to look at it. I don't blame us. I don't blame the city staff. It just didn't happen. I don't want to have a vote on it. I don't say we talked about it because we didn't. I want to acknowledge that we didn't do it, put it back in the city council, say, you know what? We couldn't get this part done, but you still should do it. So we put in our report. We didn't do it. We're sorry, but you still ought to do it. That is the purpose of this motion. I'm not worried about the hour. I can go to midnight. But that's the purpose of the motion. I don't think we talked about it. I would have liked to. I don't want to have a peripheral discussion about swimming pools and water heaters and grass. But I really want this discussed, and I would like if somebody would amend it to have stronger language to impose the city council do this within a year or something. But I don't think, if I'm out of order because I'm speaking too much to the motion, sir, when it
You are
hasn't
not.
received
Continue.
a second. Okay. That's the purpose of the motion. We didn't get to it. It was in the bylaws to do it. We didn't do it. So we acknowledge it. We'll report that we didn't do it and tell the city council we didn't get to it, but you still need to do this. That's it.
I have a point of order here.
Committee Sharp, go
I
ahead.
don't think we're on C yet. I think we still have something to vote on E. We didn't vote on whether we were going to have another meeting to see the revised rates. And so
That vote happened.
that's still happening.
Voted.
Yeah, that vote happened.
That happened.
Oh, we did?
Yes.
Okay. I voted
Could I-
aye.
Committee Member,
You voted against that, March.
Oh, I did. I voted against
You wanted another meeting, March.
That's right, I
You
did.
voted for another meeting.
I did.
Committee Member Manerick, you've noticed under C, go down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, about 8 blocks. City consider implementing another water citizen group to continue the efforts made by the Water Planning Committee.
See that, Mr. Chairman?
It's so.
I think
Well,
I can
I mean-
make a suggestion. I understand, I think, what is being proposed here, and I don't think it's unreasonable. My suggestion on it would be, that if you remember, we're putting together a report of what, the committee action and so forth, a draft of which was provided. My suggestion to address that is consistent with the motion, but I think I would also suggest adding items that had been brought up in the discussions but had not been fully vetted or something to that effect, and list out items. A lot of you had some good comments along the way that at the very least I think warrant the light of day to be sending them forward.
Eric?
Mr. Chairman, that point makes perfect sense. I assume that the report will be put before the members, and the motion speaks that we're going to make this recommendation as part of our report, and so any type of item like that could certainly be included. So my motion intended to include explicitly that if we so choose.
Due to lack of a second. You haven't received a second would be the only issue.
So
Excuse me, implicitly meant that, not explicitly.
We didn't receive a second, so the motion failed.
Is there a second? Just check and see if
Well,
after the
we
further
did this earlier,
explanation.
and then that's when we got caught by it. But motion did fail.
So I think the question for the committee is, how do you want to discuss items C up there then? Oh,
Yeah,
let
we
me do
still
the
have
non-rate
recommend
revenue
non-rate
just to close that
Yeah,
up.
what about the non-rate fees?
Yes, what I'm gonna suggest on that, and this is getting to be an hour of the day type thing. We intentionally asked the consultant to hold this presentation till the end. You have copies of it, but I'm gonna suggest that we do very similar to what you just heard on this, that we just make that a staff recommendation, and just, the committee did not have time to review those, because quite frankly, the hour of the day is getting late. Any of you, there is a copy attached in the report that you have tonight. Any of you that have any comments whatsoever, obviously feel free to contact us. We're willing to discuss it. If the committee wants to review them tonight, of course, we've got a presentation ready that you can see.
Point of order. So, Mr. Chairman, I go back to the fact that we did not finish E, recommend non-rate revenues.
That's what he's talking about. The question Larry's bringing to us was, if we want to talk about that, we'd have to have the continued presentation by Dan. Is that correct?
I would
Okay, so
suggest
that's
if you
part
want to
of
make recommendations
C.
on it, you see their presentation.
Yeah,
But
this
given
one
the
is
late
part of
hour
this procedure
and the issues still before the committee, I would suggest,
Excuse me, Larry, can you repeat that for Committee Member Sharp?
Okay, there are, in the presentation, there's available a presentation to show you recommended non-rate revenues and how those structures would change. Given the fact that that has not been discussed at all by the committee, the hour of the day, I think that that is something that staff can make that recommendation, and the report just explicitly say that the committee did not have an opportunity to review that. If that is the committee's wish, we're good with that. If you want a presentation on it, and that's the committee's wish, we have the right people here to give you that.
Is this
Committee Member Sharp?
discussion? Well, first of all, I would like to see that presentation on non-rate revenues and everything else, because that's a part of the whole economic picture.
Is it?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay.
Let's do it.
Lainey, if we could get the presentation back up. She is there, and
Page 24. Thank you. Would you like another water?
Good evening.
1 second, please. Committee member, or alternate Pancrazzi?
I need to drive to Yuma. I'm going to have to excuse myself.
Okay, continue.
Good evening. My name is JoLynn Rains. I'm a principal consultant with Economist.com. And I'm pleased to be here tonight to share with you a summary of the city's non-rate fees and services. The city maintains a schedule of fees and charges for services that are offered in addition to the basic water and wastewater monthly service charges. These fees are only charged to those customers who specifically request the associated service or those who are violating the utility code. And these fees were last updated by the city in 2007. The study that we have performed for the city is based on two things. Each fee is evaluated. It's based on what it costs the city to provide the service. And we have compared the fees that the city charges to other cities in the Phoenix metropolitan area. The project team, we worked very closely with staff to evaluate what it costs the city to provide each of the services. And each of the fees was evaluated for the cost, and we separate that into 4 separate areas. Labor, we looked at a 15-minute incremental labor for clerical staff, technical staff, and professional staff if necessary, based on the current fully loaded salaries. Any additional materials that were used to provide the service, vehicle usage, the number of trips if it were necessary, the mileage, and if a service was provided on a route, that was also considered, as well as any other miscellaneous charges. Now, this next slide has a lot of columns and a lot of numbers, and I'll just try and point out the most important pieces of information. The fees that we evaluated are in the column under the description, and just to let you know that these fees are common to what we see in other Arizona cities and other cities that we work with across the United States. It's important to city staff, and our project team agrees that these fees and the fees that are recommended are just and reasonable to be charged to the citizens of the city of Goodyear. The city fees are similar to fees that are charged in other cities in the Phoenix metropolitan area. Some cities charge higher fees and some lower fees, and generally that is dependent upon when the fees were last updated. In 2014, the second column, the revenue collected by the city was $777,000 for these fees. The current fees are highlighted in yellow. The next column is the proposed fee, and the proposed fees are based on the basis for recommendation, and that specifically is what it costs the city to provide the service. A couple of them that I want to point out. The first is the returned check fee. It's currently $35, and we're recommending a proposed fee of $50. The cost for the city to provide the fee is $52.25. And a brief explanation of that is that when a check is returned to the city, the bank charges the city $35. So there was no clerical time included. So going on 15-minute increments, the cost to the city to provide that is $52.25, hence the proposed fee of $50. And the only other one that I'd like to address briefly is the security deposit for non-residential or commercial customers. It's currently $250, and yet the cost of the city to provide is $688. And the way that that's calculated, which is common among cities, is based on 1 month of average commercial usage for water and wastewater service. So that $688 cost to the city, we're recommending a fee increase to $650. There's 5 other fees that we're recommending increases to, and each one of those increases is simply based on what it costs the city to provide the service. If we expect that the fees will be charged in the same number of fees in this fiscal year as in fiscal year 2014, we would expect an increase in fees or revenue to the city of $12,357. That's all there is. Quick summary.
Any discussions? Committee Member Sharp?
The water audit fee and the field visit. Now, say I, as a consumer, want to have somebody come out and say I have a disagreement with what water is going down my sewer because I have a lot of landscaping. So, in order to, from a conservation point, I guess, in order to have people, have somebody come out to look at that, to adjust their sewer rate, would they pay the water audit fee plus the field visit if they came out to your house?
John, do you know?
The water audit fee is only, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sandy, is only charged if someone schedules an appointment and they're a no-show. That's
correct. For a sewer appeal, there is no charge for the field visit, and if it's a home irrigation checkup, the charge applies if there's a no-show or a failure to cancel or to put.
Thank you.
Otherwise, it's free.
Okay, thank you.
Any other discussions?
Mm-hmm.
Can I have a motion and a second to approve the recommend non-rate revenues?
So moved.
I have a motion from Committee Member Wilson
Second.
and a second from Committee Member Batner.
Or better.
We've been going back and forth on that. Item is open for discussion. Anyone from the public? But the committee, any discussions? Now we're tired. We're quiet.
No, it was straightforward.
Okay,
Equals
roll
revenue.
call vote.
Mayor Himmon? Mayor Member Menard?
Yes.
Mayor Passion?
Yes.
Mayor Shine?
Yes.
Mayor Wilson?
Aye.
Mayor Rosednik?
Yes.
Vice Chair Batter?
Aye.
Chairman Columbia?
Yes. Motion carries.
So this final column, which is really just the last little piece kind of hanging out there, given that the motion failed to move that in a formal way, what the thinking was that would be one of the pieces of the report with recommendations in there. And so these are some of them. I don't know if I need to read through every single one of them or if you would like to do that, or if you want to add more to that as you get the report, and you can make changes to that as you do that iterative process. So I don't know if we want to continue further discussion. Right. Okay, they don't have to be consensus, is what Hannah said. So recommendations from the committee.
I would probably just read through them, just real quick.
Sure,
if you could.
absolutely. So the first one is the city investigate and potentially implement additional water conservation initiatives, i.e. gray water rebate, rainwater harvesting incentives, rebate program, turf conversions, additional outdoor water usage education. Next one, the city look into regulations on hot water heaters, more efficient systems, perks for builders to install them. The next one is for the city to review policies regarding grass in yards. Next is the city investigate and potentially implement citywide stipulations on pools, i.e. a lottery system, rainwater collection to refill water conservation pool codes. Next is the city review how to restrict builders and homeowners to desert landscaping. The city review landscaping guidelines in the zoning ordinance and elsewhere to potentially make adjustments to the amount of trees and vegetation planted to conserve water. The city investigate the possibility of renegotiating or canceling Estrella reclaimed water agreements. The city consider implementing another water citizen group to continue the efforts made with the water planning committee, this water planning committee. The city better integrate water conservation into the development permit application and land entitlement process And then in parentheses was the Tucson model, which was brought up in one of our meetings. And finally, the city consider implementing assistance program, for example, lifeline rates, which was also brought up. Those all sound like things we'd like to include in our recommendations. All right.
Discussions on that?
All right.
I can help myself, Mr. Chair. If we're making a motion on this, I'll be voting against all of these. Quite frankly, a lot of these recommendations impact other city departments, whether it's economic development or community development. It impacts a lot of developers. There hasn't been much discussion. I'm not saying I disagree with policies, but these are pretty broad policies that could have wide-reaching impacts.
So are you saying your preference is not to include them? I mean, at all?
At all.
It's your preference, okay.
Some members felt, this need to be included, and that's where we had a lot of the city research look into implements and things like that, so it's not definite. It's what can be done, what.
These are items that would be thrown in on the plan to suggest to city council, but the way I understood it, like she's mentioning, I didn't think we were going to vote.
But Mr. Chair, but by including it, isn't that essentially aligned with this committee's recommendations?
Yes. Committee Member Menerick?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm in favor, I support the position of Member Hinman. I really do. We haven't talked in depth about these, and I think I agree with my fellow member that these could have wide-ranging impacts, disparate impacts. Then I would hesitate, too, to vote in favor of inclusion any of this, which is why I thought we should have, I made my motion, which I accept, did not receive a second, it did not want to be considered, but we haven't talked about these things at all in depth. We wanted to, but we haven't. And just put a few things in and don't put other things in, and we don't know what the cost benefit, we don't know who wins, who loses, we don't know if it's a zero-sum game. I would probably side with the member there that I would be very reluctant to vote for any inclusion of any of these items at this state of the process. Thank you. I yield the floor.
Should I go around the table and just see what the feeling is related to that?
Let's get a quick discussion
Okay.
at round table.
Committee Member Wilson, what are your thoughts on these being just kind of included?
Well, again, it's a matter of how much education there is. Several of those things, I went through classes at the water department. We talked about those things when I first moved to Goodyear 7 or 8, 9 years ago. I don't remember when they did, but the education there is very good. I recommend that we check into that and attend some of those classes. But, if anything, the one about an ongoing committee might be a different committee that would look at these things and take it from there. But other than that, I would say no. No additional recommendations.
Okay, thank you. Committee Member Menard, anything additional?
I yield the floor. I already spoke.
All right, thank you. Committee Member Passion.
Well, certainly, I think there's probably some good ideas in here, but none of them have been discussed in depth at all. And certainly, they need to be discussed in depth before you could even make some kind of motion on them.
Okay. Committee Member Scheid.
I would tend to agree also. I agree with Jerry that there are, if we're looking at ways for the city to get education levels out on water conservation things, they can form a water conservation committee. They have very good departments. They have a water resources department that handles a lot of the community. They go out to the children. They try to let new customers know. I'm uncomfortable with some of the items on this list. I would have a tendency to agree. I would just vote that we don't put any of this on the report and we kind of stick to what we were asked to do.
Committee Member Zednik?
Yeah, I was a little disappointed. Essentially, we sat through some wonderful presentations, and we initially started, and we were tasked, I thought, that to bring ideas to the table. And some of these are ideas. And as though none of them have been vetted properly, I'm sure, it doesn't mean that those ideas shouldn't be vetted and shouldn't be discussed. Like I said, we sat for the last several months going through, all the consultants and all the water department and everybody's charts and graphs and dollar figures and everything. And initially we were said, Bring your ideas. We want to hear what the public has to say. Now we don't. So I would say that either we continue on somehow with this, or at least let somebody know these are the ideas of some of the different committee members, because I think they're valid, and I think they're valid not only to some of the committee members but also the public out there. And by not doing it, it's a misjustice.
Thank you. Committee member Zednik, alternate Zednik. Thoughts?
Well, we haven't had enough time to discuss any of these, and they are good ideas. But they do impact a lot of different, from legal to code enforcement. So, but I do think we need to mention it. I just, because we did have these ideas, and whether or not the city's going to carry it out further, I mean,
Okay.
we should mention it.
Okay.
It should
Thank
be
you.
noted some way.
Committee member Hinman, anything additional? Committee member Sharp.
Well, I think we should table a lot of these, and by tabling, I mean table them from our group, and perhaps pass on that we would like City Council to review this list and perhaps either form a new environmental committee or another committee to consider this and any other items that might come up.
Okay.
I'd hate to see, there are some that I don't agree with at all, and there are some that I think are very valid, and I think swimming pool rates are very important, and I think that those ideas should be supported, and whether we continue on, table it, we could table them.
All right. Vice Chair Batten.
Is that a motion?
No, it's not.
Vice Chair Batten.
It could be.
Being that I work in the water and wastewater industry, I would hope and I truly believe that the water department and the city in general is looking at conservation, getting out, fix a leak, repair things, stuff that I know we're doing. I don't think it should be included in the report because we haven't come to any kind of consensus on these. I think it would take a lot longer than we have here. I would hope that the city would continue on and with these notes, obviously look into if there's anything that maybe is new here that hasn't been viewed. But I would tend to put it on city staff that I trust them that they're doing their job and I hope they continue to do a good job. And I don't think this should be included only because we've come to no kind of consensus.
Okay. Chairman Columbia.
I would agree with my committee members that it'll take a long time. We're going across departments, possibly legal issues with some of these. So I would suggest that we adapt. If you take a look at here, number 8, where it says, city consider implementing another water citizen group to continue the efforts made with the Water Planning Committee. That would be my suggestion.
So I'll pass it back to you if you'd like to entertain a motion from anyone for anything.
Okay, so I'm going to read item 6.9, discuss and consider action on recommendations for water resources for growth and development. Oops. 1 minute, please. Can I have a motion and a second to approve?
Let me see it.
He can't make it, but he can ask us to make the motion.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I'm happy to
Take a stab at it.
Mr. Chair, I move to direct city staff to not include any of the recommendations, including item C, with the exception of directing staff to recommend the city consider implementing another water citizen group to continue the efforts made by.
I second.
So I have any discussions from the public and committee members? Okay. Roll call vote?
Committeemember Zednik,
Yes.
Committeemember Wilson,
Yes.
Committeemember Sharp,
Aye.
Committeemember Shive,
Yes.
Committeemember Passion,
Yes.
Committeemember Hinman, Committeemember Menard,
Yes.
Vice Chair Battern,
Aye.
Chairman Columbia.
Yes. Motion carries. One more. Discuss a draft of the Water Planning Committee recommendations report and process moving forward for review and presentation to council at the June 15th, 2015 work session.
Oh, if you'd like to, go ahead.
Okay, really quickly, you have a very rough draft in your packet. I wrote draft across the front of yours because I forgot to put the watermark on, so I apologize about that, but you can see it's very preliminary. Some of the sections will change, particularly at the end with the sustainability recommendations. But I just wanted to pass that along so you guys could see that. What we're going to do will be I will work with Chairman Columbia and Vice Chair Battern to get this put together. They'll review it. We'll send it out to the committee. And then we will go to the council, staff, and the chair and vice chair will go to the council on June 15th.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the floor. The idea wasn't well received by my fellow members about 3 months ago, but on this particular, I see that the chair and the vice chair are being saddled with the responsibility they may not want. Bring you to Article 5, subcommittees. The chair has the authority to appoint a subcommittee. I will not make a motion, but I will bring it up that perhaps the chair would like to form a subcommittee for the purpose of working with city staff on the draft report.
Do I have a motion?
Well, I didn't get a second for my motion, sir, so I'm not going to move. Because I don't want to have two motions with no seconds in one night. There's silence around the table. March, I'm not going.
Wow.
But I'll second it.
I'm ready for you. No.
I'll second it.
So, that was just a comment then.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to have
Can we have a discussion?
Can we have a discussion?
Who would be willing to serve on this subcommittee, I guess?
Well, I would be. I write reports for a living. And,
okay.
But this is something in conversation that the chair and the vice chair need to consider because they need to have balance on a subcommittee and have people that they think reflect the overall consensus of the committee because that would otherwise it'd be a futile subcommittee.
Well, in order to have consensus, you need an uneven number. You know, if you're going to be approaching, if you're going to have some kind of, you need enough people or an odd number so that you have agreement, even if one person doesn't agree. You see what I'm trying to say?
Remember, the report's going to come back to the full committee, so it doesn't need that. And I would suggest that the chair would probably consult with all the members of the committee and say, look, if I appoint these two to a subcommittee, are you happy?
So his was just a comment. And the way I'm looking at this, the way I understood it was, she'll be working with Vice and myself, and we'll go over this, and then it'll be passed out to the committee for review. So I'm okay with that. Again, this is just a discussion. But
Mr. Chair, if I could clarify one comment. Traditionally on the June 15th is the night of the presentation to the City Council. The chair, vice chair probably be leading in that participation, representing the committee. But all of you are invited and encouraged to attend that meeting. The City Council appreciates when the members of the committee also attend or those that are able to. It's obviously not required to, but I thought I would just... Sounded like it was just those two that were invited, and it's meant to be broader than that.
Any more discussions? One second, please. Okay. All right. Now it's time for questions from the public. Are there any comments, question cards?
I'm going to get a question out of you yet.
Gotta follow. You're it. Now it's time for information items. Does anyone on the committee have an information item they'd like to share?
I have one.
Committee Member Sharp?
On Sundays in the Republic on 5/17, there was an article about once polluted water irrigates ball fields, and it had to do with the plume. I don't know if you all saw this.
I didn't, thank you.
Okay, if you basically what it says is that there is a field of water that is on the back side between Bullard and the ballpark. And that is being provided to the ballpark at no cost because I gather it was a Superfund site and they decided to do that as a no cost. But I guess my comment is that we've all been talking about how there is cost to water. And I think like the taxpayer dollars probably, EPA dollars probably went into the remediation of that Superfund site. But I guess nobody else would want to put that kind of water on their site except for the ballpark. And they're probably grateful to receive it. So as long as it has been remediated and everything, at one point in time, committee member Zednick said, well, what is the city doing to, remediate or conserve water? And this is one way they're doing it. They're taking the plume water and providing it to the ballpark.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to ask Mark Holmes to come up and address this because this is really a success story, and I want to give Mark Holmes a lot of credit for this because it's through his efforts that we have a win-win in many regards.
Thank you very much, and thanks for pointing out the article. This is a great win-win for the city and for expediting the cleanup. This is for the Phoenix Goodyear Airport South Superfund site located at the airport. There's actually two Superfund plumes. One is north of the airport, one is on the airport, and slightly just a little bit north of the airport, but predominantly on the airport. So this is actually being paid for by private dollars. This is with Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company. This company is paying out of their coffers the monies to remediate the groundwater. They're required under both EPA and ADQ regulatory safe drinking water components under the Superfund. They're required to pump and treat the water and remove the contaminants. So that's what they're doing. To help expedite the remedy, they're actually looking for ways to dispose of or discharge water versus trying to figure out where to put the water back in the aquifer. It becomes very complicated hydraulically when you put water in over here and you got to pull it out over here. It becomes very, very complex. So they've approached the city, and it became a great win-win where they can deliver this water to the ballpark. And that is, right now they're delivering 500 gallons per minute. That's over 800 acre feet a year, or about 262 million gallons per year. So what that comes down to is right now the ballpark is taking about a quarter of that water. So, and that's a cost savings to the general fund. The general fund pays the water bill for the ballpark complex. So that's a direct savings to every taxpayer of the city. And it's right now about $250,000 just for the ballpark complex. And again, we have 3/4 of that water left to figure out other beneficial uses. So right now we're having internal means to figure out where we can best utilize the water supply. And Goodyear Tire and Rubber is actually, looking at how we can better partner. So I think there's future opportunities, to your point. Thanks for bringing it up, but it is a great win-win. Just to let you know, too, that Goodyear Tire and Rubber with the PJ South is not the only. We actually are doing the same thing with the community park up in the northern area and Liberty Service area. We actually pulled the community park off of Liberty Service area, which is part of the CAGRD. It's member lands. So the PGA North Superfund site is providing all the water for the community park, which is one of the city's largest parks. That's about a cost savings. I think it's around between $35,000 and $40,000. We do pay for energy. So to your point, we do pay for a little electricity to move water. That's not the case here. It's all paid for at the south of the ballpark. It is paid for by the Superfund site. So the city did invest in a little bit of infrastructure, but the return on investment was about a year and a half. So after a year and a half, that infrastructure is paid off, and we'll have many more years of it is free water being delivered to the city. So thank you for bringing it up. I hope I answered and clarified.
Yes.
Thank you.
Anything else?
To that, Member Zednik talked to me a great deal about it, and I really appreciated it. Several months ago, I did know about it, and it really is an extraordinary effort that the city did.
All right, next time we will meet will be with the council work session on June 15th, 2015. That's where we mentioned that we'll be presenting the vice and myself. You folks are more than welcome to attend. There will be no further business to discuss. This meeting is adjourned.